Welcome back to DemystifySci. I'm Shiloh.
I'm Anastasia.
This is the podcast where we explore theories that may change the way we see the world in the future. And to that end, we are continuing our discussion of low-energy nuclear reactions and the possibility of fusion occurring throughout nature, not just in the heart of stars, perhaps in laboratories all around the world right now. And for that conversation, we have Bob Greenyer, who is a lifelong engineer who over the past couple of decades has devoted himself towards the project of fusion on Earth.
Bob is also one of the main contributors to the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, which is an open source science project where he's been doing tons and tons of experiments in public, in real time, where everybody's able to go and look at their devices, follow along with the surface characterizations that appear to show that they're producing heavy elements. Now, the problem with talking to Bob is the fact that Bob presents information in like one gigantic blob. And something that we're always trying to do on the podcast is we're trying to take somebody's story and somehow linearize it, put it in terms of something that can be understood, some kind of mental movie that allows you to see the pieces and how they fit together so that you walk away from the conversation with a deeper intuitive sense of whatever theory we're talking about, whether or not it proves to be correct. This conversation is somewhat resistant to that approach, mostly because Greenyer has a somewhat alchemical, esoteric, maybe even kind of occult orientation towards the question of fusion. And so, on one hand, he's producing these experiments where they're seeing the transmutation of light elements into heavy elements. They're doing SEM characterization of the materials. They are pursuing the investigations using very, very conventional technologies. But on the other side of it is the question of what is actually happening? What are the mechanisms? Is there an atomic story that we can tell about the materials and the influences of the magnetic fields and the electric currents and how they are producing transmutations? And the jury's still out on that. Would you agree?
And on the other hand, there's accounts of a lot of the same patterns being described all the way back into ancient times. This brings in phenomena like ball lightning, which has been updated as this plasmoid phenomenon, the repeat swirls and patterns and toroids throughout the ancient esoteric texts. And so there is like something really deeply unconscious that is repatterned in these processes. So I think there's something really interesting there, and we discuss all around this. I think we're actually going to probably have to have Bob back to get deeper into the alchemy. He does host a conference, or co-host a conference, I believe, regarding these alchemical overlaps, which occurs in Prague in the spirit of an ancient alchemy group there. Not ancient, but let's say
Medieval,
yeah, alchemy group from Prague. So we're all over the place, but we're also talking about some very simple experiments, which Bob says you can reproduce at home for $40, and we'll tell you how to do that in this episode.
And so, as an interesting companion to this piece is a conversation that we just released with one Lawrence Forsley, who has been working on lattice confinement fusion also for the last 50-ish years or so. He's approaching it from a completely different direction, very straight, very technical. And so the two conversations kind of exist as a side-by-side foil of the two different paths. And it's interesting because Forsley and Greenyer know of each other, they travel in the same circles, and they clearly have some kind of charge that is exchanged between them over the course of these conversations.
And there's a lot of other names that have been popping up, and we probably need to rank order these so that we can actually line up some more conversations about this. So if you would like to vote on that and tell us who we absolutely should talk to next, please leave a comment down below.
But the point of this conversation is to explore the sphere of low-energy nuclear reactions in any way that we can, because this does seem to be the next frontier of physics. Because if what Forsley and Greenyer are talking about is real, it's gonna rewrite
everything.
physics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It changes how we understand the stars, cosmology, the future of sustainable energy on Earth, everything really. So it's really, really high impact. It's a big, if true situation. And it does seem like there is a lot of truth going on. The question is, how scalable is it and to what end? So it's a wild faucet of a download for you guys. I think you're going to love it.
Before we get to the bucking bronco of the conversation, 2 announcements. Number 1 is paradigm drift. So as part of our mission to collect theories, we have started a new segment that we're calling Paradigm Drift. And what we do is we collect people's names all month, and then when we tape, next taping is August 4th at 7 p.m. Pacific, we randomly pick people's names out of a hat, and then you get 60 seconds to present your theory, and then we ask you questions, we try to help you refine it. Our goal with it is to get people that have ideas get better and better at being able to present them to the world, because we talk about this all the time. If there's anything that going to grad school taught us, it's how to present ideas. There is a constant pressure inside of the academy in order to be able to learn to talk. And I think that this is probably the most useful thing that we can offer the world, is helping people that have these nascent, half-formed ideas figure out how to get them into something that is at the sharp end of a real concept that you can do something with. And so sign up for Paradigm Drift.
And look, if you can make it a compelling presentation in 60 seconds, you're not going to be able to cover all the details. But if you can make it interesting to us, the panel, the audience, then we'll invite you back without having to sign up next month. And if that's awesome, and we're still really interested, and there's a lot of meat there, maybe we'll get you on the podcast to elaborate at length. Hasn't happened yet, but I believe it's possible.
Absolutely. And so sign up. The sign up link is in the description below. August 4th, 7 p.m. is the next taping. It's over Zoom. Shiloh does the live music. I MC. There's a chat where everybody's hanging out. It's a really good time.
Finally, remember, guys, we can only afford to do this with all of our time because we're supported by the finest fleet of patrons that's ever existed. And so if you can break off as little as 75 cents a week, you can contribute to the success of this mission. Really, it's an awesome community. We get together once a week on Sunday mornings for our Sunday salon. Anastasia was saying she resisted calling it Sunday school because we're trying to avoid the occult as much as possible. But at any rate, it's a fantastic discussion group, and I would love to see you join us there. So you can find out more over at patreon.com/DemystifySci. And anyways, it keeps us from having stupid sponsors and things we don't care about. We have not had a product come across our desk that is so awesome that we feel we must sell it for someone else, and we would love to keep it that way. So consider supporting the project for the tiniest amount of money that you can possibly break off from your paycheck. It would mean the world to us.
Though if somebody does invent a device that transmutes lead into gold and is willing to sponsor us, I would shill that to the audience, no problem.
I'd probably pick up a couple of those.
So we do have a price.
So let's get on with the alchemy. And we'll see you guys next time.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The DemystifySci podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
We just recorded a conversation with Lawrence Forsey.
I saw it. I love him. He's a great guy.
And he's a lot of fun. He had a lot of historical perspectives, but obviously the way that he comes at the question of fusion is very buttoned up and academic. His career is firmly within these very conventional structures. And from what I've gathered looking into your work, you have this kind of historical, alchemical, almost occult history of fusion. And so I wonder if we couldn't use the time that we have together to outline some of that before we get into the details of how it works and what people have
honestly seen. It certainly didn't start out that way.
So you didn't come at it from an occult lens to begin with.
No. I bought into the whole 1971, end of the world is nigh, global warming or whatever it was called back then, climate change, or I don't know what the latest thing
Population
was.
bomb, I think.
Oh, I don't know. It's global
We're gonna run
boiling
out of
last
food.
year or something. Yeah. So, and I was born in 1972, just afterwards, and I was affected by that. In that, I only used recycled furniture when I was growing up. I used recycled clothes. I made my own solar panel to power my lights and fans in my room. You know, I made a solar powered heating system for my parents' swimming pool at the hotel that I lived in for part of my childhood. And, I saw the 1989 announcement of Pons and Fleischmann, uh, and I was reading at the time every episode or every weekly issue of New Scientist, from front cover to back cover, even all of the adverts for the jobs, which was a bit sad. Yeah. That would be weaponized autism if it was in anyone else. And I saw these scientific stories come and go, where someone thought they discovered something and then they found out they didn't. And, in more recent years, they found something like, I don't know, 10 years ago, they found that 80% of scientific papers that are published can't even be replicated by the people that actually proposed them in the first place. So, like, peer review isn't the be all and end all. So, I came at this as a passionate person about energy, and I saw this electrochemist who actually came to the same school as my father did in Worthing, where I was born in the UK. He was a couple of years ahead of him. So he grew up in the town that I did after fleeing pre-Nazi war Germany in the Czech Republic. And, he went to London Imperial. I got a place at London Imperial. I actually applied for that on, I was interested in electronics and so on. So I kind of put that to one side. I had one of the first smart cars imported into the UK. When I was living in India, I had the first electric bike in Kerala, in the state of Kerala. I had solar panels on my roof. I was fully bought into the global warming narrative, and I'd had a child, and I wanted some more children. And I thought, well, I can't responsibly have more children because the end of the world's just around the corner. So I thought, well, I do want more children, and so I need to find a solution to the energy problem because it underpins everything. And so I took myself at my own expense in 2012 to ICCF 17 in Daejeon in South Korea. And there was this fairly colourful Italian that had drummed up a little bit of interest in the field called Andrea Rossi. And there were 4 other people at the conference who were newcomers like me. And I proposed setting up, because what I could see was there were people working in gas systems, people working in liquid systems, people working in plasma systems. And they all had their own theories. There was something like 70 theories, and at least 69 of them must be wrong. And it was a case of like, okay, so what can we do here that's different? Because everyone is not replicating anyone else. And
Rossi got kind of busted out at some point, right? For, he like made up a fake customer or something for his nuclear reactor. And
sorry, who was that?
This was Andrea Rossi.
Andrea Rossi. Yeah, I mean, having been on the thick end of trying to raise money for research, I've seen, for instance, in the European Union, 1/2 of the 11 million or 11.7 million that was raised, 1/2 of the whole groups actually didn't do an experiment. And they did 5 years and took half of 11.7 million euros from the European Union. But they said to me they didn't do an experiment on their closing meal. They invited me to their closing meal, right? And so like it's always a difficult thing trying to find finance. And you had Larry Forsley saying things along those lines the other day. Yes, if you're not in the military circles, you don't get finance. So it's a difficult question. And when it started off with such a difficult story as the Pons and Fleischmann story, it's doubly hard when you've got all the decision makers already thinking they know the answer, that it's not possible, and why would we fund it? And so I guess, and I don't know the full ins and outs, but he was a colourful character. And from my point of view, what he did was he re-engaged my interest with this story where this electrochemist, I didn't understand why such a brilliant man, who I think was nominated for the Nobel or something for Raman spectroscopy or some aspect of that, would sacrifice his life, his credibility, for something that was just a falsehood. And so I wanted to solve the energy problem. This looked like a possible option. There was a little bit of a buzz around it for whatever misdemeanors or even crimes that may have been committed by parties. It was enough to get me and 4 other people there, and we decided to set up the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project. He had died a few weeks earlier before the conference, so we thought that it'd be natural to name it after him. And the idea was we would go and try and replicate those people that would be willing to provide their technology for us to replicate, because no one was replicating anyone else. And there was this Mitsubishi and a Toyota sort of replication, something going on in Japan that happened at one point. But Larry talked a bit about that in your previous podcast about how one of the naval engineers went in, and there's a whole issues of suspicion about whether the contaminants were spiked, if you know what I mean, right? Just to try and dismiss it, because there's a lot of competition going on, and that's sad if that happened. So don't underestimate when you have the prize for unlimited energy with very inexpensive fuel stuffs, that there might be things being said which aren't necessarily true on all sides. Anyway, we went there. I found there was possibly a path. People were observing the same kind of products, which weren't necessarily production of helium or tritium or whatever in these different experiments, but they were doing wildly different experiments. So I thought, actually, there's probably a common thing going on between all of these. But firstly, we needed to work out if there was anything, real. And we set up the project there and then on the second day of that conference, the 5 of us, and we set up 3 aims, and these are the same 3 aims we've held to this day. One, show the world there is a new practical primary energy source we call the new fire, which we believe we did on our second attempt, 2 months after we started the project. We replicated Francesco Celani's wires. We didn't when we tried to do what he was going to do next, which was use fused quartz. We swapped it back to what he was currently doing at the time we went to replicate him, which was borosilicate, and it worked. And I presented that in an army base in Rome in December the 14th, 2012, just a few months after we started. And then after we found that it was real, I was stuck then. It was a bit like Larry said, once you've seen it's real, it's like, oh God, now I have to continue.
Well, when you say that you saw that it was real, what did you see?
Yeah. So we did extremely careful calibration curves on a Stefan Boltzmann basis on we have a tube, which is a borosilicate in this case. And we'd already done it with fused quartz and we didn't see any excess heat. So the same wire, and this wire is a specially treated Constantan wire. This is a copper nickel wire that is dual heated in air to produce oxide cracked layers on the surface. And then that gets reduced in the hydrogen atmosphere. So you end up with a highly porous structure, a nanostructure on the outside with a solid copper nickel conductor through the center. So you are directly heating it, and you will have this nanostructure built onto the outside, which he adds in things like low work function materials like potassium compounds and lithium and sol gel or whatever to improve its characteristics as per his understanding. So for those that don't know, Francesco Celani was a researcher and is a researcher at the Italian National Frascati Institute of Nuclear Science. And he's a brilliant and fun individual. And he was the first person to allow us to attempt to replicate his work. And essentially what it is you put a non-treated wire in there, same pressure domain, same exact apparatus, and you see if you do a control run, you step the temperature up, wait for it to get to thermal equilibrium, and then step the temperature down over a long period of time. And then you have various thermocouples on there or a thermal imaging camera, and you assess the amount of heat that's being produced on that basis. Then you swap out the control wire for a so-called activated wire, and you see the difference. And we saw a difference of 12.5% in extra thermal energy coming out over the control. And so we went to extreme lengths to improve this apparatus to have a control on one side running simultaneously with the same current loop going through with the active side, another one. And ultimately we had one running in Switzerland, which was in a DWAR, in water and vacuum, in a calorimeter and so on. in every case, it was sort of less than 20% excess heat, but very regularly over unity. After our first experiments, we tended to do double cells, so we had the control and active running in the same environment and so forth.
Okay, so this is something that I didn't totally gather from the Forsley interview. Why is excess heat the measure? Like, what is the significance of excess heat for this?
Well, I was later to learn it's pointless trying to argue excess heat because they'll always tear you down as having some error, right? But excess heat is the way actual generation, as you rightly noted, you boil water and you turn a steam turbine. And that's how most electricity is generated. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from coal or gas or nuclear power or even some solar collectors. There's all kinds of different systems, but they're using water because it's a very good intermediary. It expands 1,617 times going to steam. When it's dry steam, it doesn't damage stuff, and you can do a lot of work with it, and then you cool it down and recycle it. So that's your work medium to transfer your energy that you've captured. And so, like, you want a system.
Hold on 1 second. So, what's dry steam? Sorry, I just can't let that go. I've never heard that term.
Dry steam is where it's not containing any water, like entrained water. It's
like
literally
droplets.
Gas
There's
of
no
water molecules.
Okay, so no droplets.
There's no what's called specifically and exactly entrained water.
So it's just perfectly vaporized.
It's perfect gas of water molecules.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. All right.
And it can gain extra thermal energy because the water molecules can have higher kinetic energy themselves, and also their bonds can have higher kinetic vibrations. So you can have dry steam at, let's say, 180 degrees centigrade. You can have a dry steam at 650 degrees centigrade. And the higher you get your dry steam, the more efficient it is. So modern nuclear reactors aim for a higher temperature of steam so that they can produce higher efficiencies up to sort of not 25, 35%, but up to 40% maybe in energy recovery from the actual fuel, if you know what I mean.
Okay, so you have this system where you have a wire that has some kind of patterned lattice on the surface, and you pass current through the metal that's underneath that. And then as a consequence, you get this excess heat?
So here's the thing. Yes. And it's not trivial. And what we found is that you need thermal gradients. And it wasn't until... And we found that basically the wire itself was wound around supporting mica. And the mica would then hold... There was 120 degree segments on each loop of the wire. In fact, I've got it next door, but anyway, and between where it was supported and the middle of the wire, there was 100 degrees centigrade difference on the actual wire. And so in each loop, you've got 6 gradients of thermal temperature gradients. You've got the point where it's contacted, up a difference of 100, and then down to a difference of 100 times 3 on each loop. And it wasn't until I met Francesco Piantelli, who was the discoverer of the nickel hydrogen system, in January in 2015. We had a week with him in his lab in Siena and in his house it was wonderful. So thank you, Francesco. He talked about in his patent, he showed a coil that was wound consistently from one end to another. And he said what's not true in this entire patent is that winding, because the winding is tightly wound at one end and then stretches out. Okay. And the reason being is that the metal rod, which in his case was a specially treated piece of nickel, had a thermal temperature gradient on it, because there's one thing in physical processes that change almost everything else. That's temperature. You change temperature and all the kind of parameters change. Okay. So if you have a temperature spread, you are automatically doing thousands and thousands of experiments at the same time. Okay. And so what he showed us was this nickel rod, which was about 7 centimeters long. And this produced the most energy of any experiment that he produced in his lab. It also produced vast neutron fluxes, which were actually from vanadium 50 that was in the steel that he was using in the rest of the reactor. It was actually a secondary reaction. Okay, it was a high energy proton hitting vanadium-50 and producing a neutron. And what you could see is when it's on phonon resonance, that is thermal vibration of the metal lattice, you have a particular set of parameters that hits the sweet spot, the process takes place, and instantaneously it stops working. But the next piece next to it is a little bit cooler, and it gets heated to the right temperature. And what it does, it slides up until other parameters are out of capability, and it slides back down. So it was a 6 millimeter segment of a 7 centimeter or 6 centimeter rod that was the active area, and the temperature was right. So you have to have a temperature gradient. So when, for instance, the University of Missouri tried to replicate Francesco Celani's wire, they were not successful. And at 2018, I went to visit their lab, and I go, well, that's why. They go, what? I said, you've got a perfect D-wire in a perfect calorimeter where everything is exactly the same temperature. And then you're heating it internally using a ceramic support where the wire is constantly in contact with the whole ceramic. So every part of that wire is at exactly the same temperature, right? It might be great for your data. The problem is, as soon as you ever hit the exact temperature which the process occurs, you're going to go boom, and it's out of resonance. And because of the hysteresis on the response time on your calorimeter, you're never even going to see it. You're never even going to see the blip because it has to heat up the whole apparatus, and it's not on for long enough.
All right. So why is this gradient so important?
Because it gives you lots of different parameters.
Well, so basically, the way that I understand what you're saying is that if there is a sweet spot, so if this is a resonant phenomenon, and let's assume that there's some kind of, there's an amount of vibratory motion that you have to put into the matrix.
Isn't everything a resonant phenomenon?
Well, that's the problem. So the word starts to not make sense if we're not careful.
Okay, this is true. But so I suppose then that there is a sweet spot of the vibratory motion of the molecules that allows them to do something that produces this excess heat. But as soon as they produce the excess heat, they have heated it to the degree that it is out of phase with what, or like
out of sync.
Out of sync, the motion is no longer functional. And so if you don't have a gradient, you can't pass this back and forth between two spots that are functional. Is that the...
Essentially, yeah. Google made the same mistake when they blew 10 million. They got fancy people, fancy institutions. They gave them a whole chunk of change, and they said, go and replicate these guys, which was me, Parkhomov, and my colleague, my fellow director of the MFMP, Alan Goldwater. They never asked us one single question. If they'd have asked us the question, should we mix the lithium aluminium hydride with the nickel, we'd have said no. Why? Because as soon as it starts operating, it covers the nickel, and you don't have these spikes, which are all different sizes, billions and billions of them, that are able to activate and produce the active clusters at a range of temperatures to affect the little machines that do the work. And so, you know, I can come on to what I believe the little machines are. But if I switch back to Francesco Celani, we did not see excess heat when we ran our first experiment. And it's because he said, I think we can get extra power if we increase the temperature. It seems to be responding to, you know, more temperature, I get more excess heat. So he wanted to switch borosilicate, which starts to go soft at something like 300 degrees centigrade, with fused quartz tube, which is 1700 degrees. Okay, so it seemed logical. We didn't see any excess heat, so we thought we've done the first error in any replication. That is to try and change it, right? Think we can do better. So we'll switch back to borosilicate.
And the borosilicate is a substrate, or it's just the container?
No, it's the sheath on the outside. Like I say, I've got it next door. I can show you if you like. You'll know what I'm talking about.
We can have a show and tell after the break, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a glass tube, just like a cylinder. Okay, and borosilicate can often have lithium carbonate flux in it, and it can also have boron in it. And lithium and boron both interact with neutrons or neutral-like structures. Okay, now we're not saying they're neutrons, but it would appear that lithium, and there was a lot of talk in your discussion with Larry Forsley about how, you know, the fast neutrons, they interact with lithium, produce tritium and so on, and in normal hot fusion type of ideas of how to get that working. In this instance, there appears to be something that comes out of these experiments, which I think was first discovered by Ivan Filimonenko when he was doing a palladium deuterium boiling water reactor in the 1950s, but it was classified Russian research. He said there was some kind of radiation that came out of these experiments that was able to change the half-life of radioactive isotopes. That was in the 1950s. And that's what is on the record as something that he said. Well, something does come out. And I believe it was interacting with lithium and boron. To cut straight to the chase, I was discussing this with 2000 at ICCF 18 in Missouri with Francesco Celani, and he says, "Oh, that would explain why our tube in the center, when we had a thermocouple in the center, it was getting hotter, and that was because they were using Maco, and Maco uses 7.5% boron oxide." And that is a machinable ceramic that he had as his support. And it's also what is in the center of the Piantelli reactor. So I was talking this in 2018 to a Russian researcher called Anatoly Klimov. He made these laser that comes out in front of the hypersonic missiles to cause turbulence in front and allow them to travel a lot faster. He's the guy that did that. And he kind of like got a bit sweaty, walked away, and he came back and said, "Oh, okay, all right. If we just do our normal plasma vortex reactor, we get up to 2 times excess heat. But if we use a neutron moderator like or capture element like lithium, indium, gadolinium, these kind of elements, boron, then we get up to 10 times COP. And these are not neutrons. They call them fake neutrons. They're not real neutrons. And this is an issue that you know, there's a very famous guy in this field now. He was basically excluded from the field until I found out about him in 2017, called Kenneth Radford Shoulders. So the fact that we're speaking on a computer here, and the fact that we have semiconductors, is down to Kenneth Radford Shoulders. He developed the screening technology to make microelectronics. He is the father of microelectronics. He also invented the quadrupole mass spectrometer, which we use very regularly to assess different isotopes in elements that we made. They're just 2 of the things that he made. But anyway, he discovered this thing called exotic vacuum objects, and he was researching the work of one John Hutchison, another colourful character, who in 1979 was messing around with radio gear and Tesla equipment and got various stories, but the one I got was slapped on the back of the head with a lump of metal, and over a period of a year he was levitating metal, putting metal into other pieces of metal, making metal disappear, making it twist up, and so on. Anyway, he established that this type of radiation is what does this magic, and he calls it exotic vacuum objects. He originally called it electron validium for strong electrons, and then he called it charge clusters because he realized it could transport ions. He then called it high density charge clusters because he realized it was much more dense than an ordinary plasma. He then called it an exotic vacuum object, and it's taken a long time to get to the point of understanding what that actually is.
Okay, so let's go back to the simplest possible experiment. So you're reproducing Celani's wire in this, and so the first replication that you do, you switch over to the quartz tube. The quartz tube doesn't work. I presume that you go back to the borosilicate.
We go, and immediately we see the excess. Nothing has changed except for that.
And so what I'm trying to understand is the experimental setup itself. So it's literally just this wire with some kind of coating on it
that's in the atmosphere.
Okay. And so what's happening inside of the tube? You just pass currents through this wire, and all of the sudden the wire itself is generating the excess heat?
So what happens first is you get a reduction in the oxides. So they are removed because you've got hydrogen in the atmosphere. And then you effectively what they call load the metal. Now, nickel, unlike palladium, does not absorb hydrogen into its lattice. It adsorbs it onto the surface. When you have copper there, you've basically got a mixture of two metals, and the hydrogen gets into everything. It's pretty small stuff, but it can't go into the bulk of the nickel. And so and this is where you come into the 70 different theories. I have a certain understanding. It's highly predictive, and it's not something.
Is this the little machines that you were talking about?
Yeah. So actually, my French colleague Mathieu Vallat, he actually ended up going on to work with the other half of the European-funded project. He's still actually up at Szczecin University under Konrad Chersky, who you were recommended to speak to, who he proposes this electron screening type approach to why it's working. But anyway, he phoned me up all very excited. He says, "I've got a leak in the active cell." I said, "Oh, great, we've got a leak." He says, "Yeah, but over a couple of days, it leaks out the 3 bar of active pressure down to normal atmospheric pressure, and I have to recharge it. And every time I put a new fresh 2 bar extra of hydrogen in there, I get this tripling of signal on my Geiger-Muller counter that lasts for about 90 seconds. And we go, "What?" I said, "Stop it. I'm going to get on a plane. I'm going to come down there. I want to video this," right? Sure enough, you put the extra hydrogen in, and you get a tripling of the count rate. And I've got it all on video. It's all published on our YouTube channel. And all over the world, people start sending us papers. "Oh, we've seen something similar. We've seen something from historical work," and so on. It was replicated by another person you were recommended to speak to, Jean-Paul Barbarian, within 24 hours. And so what was coming out? Well, if it was low energy X-rays, it would not have been picked up. Even fairly high energy X-rays have not been picked up. Beta particles, forget about it. Alpha particles, forget about it.
Why? I don't know enough about nuclear reactions to understand.
Well, basically, beta particles can't go through much unless they're very high energy, and alpha particles will stop on a piece of paper. Soft X-rays will only go a few centimeters in air if you're lucky. So the only thing we had left is gamma of the ordinary particles. And then we got contacted by a company called EarthTech Texas. "Can we help you?" We go, "Okay," because we're like very naive. "Yeah, anyone can help us." "Yeah, we'd like to help you. Is there anything we can do?" Right? I go, "Okay, all right, yeah, sure. We need to get a scintillator because we think this is gamma, so we need to measure the spectrum, because the only thing that it could explain coming out and doing this is gamma rays, but we don't know why it's got a half-life of 90 seconds. It's very weird. Like what isotope is being formed instantaneously when you put extra hydrogen? It doesn't make any sense." And so they funded the scintillator. Unfortunately, there was some problems in the oil industry, and Matthew's brother had to not provide the facility in which the research was doing. So we never actually got to explore that. Fast forward to 2016, when I was talking about, for the first time, Ken Shoulders, and I was trying to find out, who. I'm in California. Can I reach out to Ken Shoulders? And I go, damn, he died, unfortunately, in 2013. Damn it. Okay, who worked with him? Scott Little. Scott Little works at EarthTech Texas. Oh, hold on, wait a minute. What's going on here? And then I find out EarthTech Texas was founded by one Hal Puthoff, which is a US naval intelligence asset. And I go, okay, something, because they actually did some other analysis, but they showed us the real results and then they withdrew them, and we were told that they wouldn't tell us the proper results and stuff. And we had been working with them off and on when they wanted to look at our data or something, without realizing it was basically a cutout, as far as I can work out. So I learned a lot. It was a bit of a baptism of fire, that whole time. But essentially, we were seeing something which I now know has to be neutral and interacts with things like lithium and boron and gadolinium and indium. Okay, so it's not a neutron. And the Russians call them fake neutrons, and they literally have a way of detecting them. This guy called Alexander Shishkin, who is from Dubna. If you go and look at my blog at remoteview.icu, you can see a description, or there's a video on YouTube. And essentially, he takes a normal boron 10 tube, which is normally used for detecting neutrons, and he reverse biases it at 590 volts, and it produces a 50 times the signal of an ordinary neutron when you produce these, what they call fake neutrons. And the fake neutrons are neutral clusters that are these energy clusters, that are these exotic vacuum objects that I believe do the magic. And they do the Lena, they do the transmutation, there are one.
Are these little pieces, like they're little chunks of atoms that are broken off? Is that the simplest way to understand them?
So you can build them or you can release them.
Let's talk about building them. That's interesting.
Okay, so building them, you can build them from plasma. And you can build it from even, it would appear, ionic material, such as water. Okay, so anything that has some form of charge separation or dipole that you then start spinning very, very quickly. Okay, and that produces current, but it kind of
this is like a magnetic spinning type thing, I would assume.
If you take a charged particle and you spin it around, it'll produce a magnetic vector. Right, and
how are you spinning it? I'm sorry, you're just like putting it in a wire. Or what are we talking about here?
Well, you can put it in a wire, but like you get these things called magnetic islands in tokamaks, and those are these kind of things, and they're a bane for people in tokamaks. These plasma instabilities. They then go off and do their own thing, and they go off and do their own thing because they don't have a neutral. They become these things. So this is a real problem, and in fact, it was interesting because when they turned on the Large Hadron Collider, I don't know if you remember this, and this is not public knowledge, but it's going to be now. I mean, I've mentioned it before, but Francesco Celani was called because they turned it on and it went poof, and it was damaged, right? And they had to repair it for 9 months before they could turn it back on again, right? But what they found were these marks in some part of the Large Hadron Collider, and apparently someone there said, oh, these look like some of the things that they're finding in the cold fusion field. So they phoned up Francesco Celani to come in and explain what they were looking at. Right? So even in a particle accelerator, the particle accelerator, they were seeing these things in places they shouldn't be. And so
it was like on the wall of the chamber.
Yeah, some damage on the wall. There's these things called unipolar arcs that you can go and look at. Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute on these unipolar arcs, where they have the tungsten of the wall of some tokamaks, and they get hit by one of these things, and it produces like a snowflake. This is like black snowflake. You can go and look at it on YouTube. And these are, in my view, an impact of one of these neutral structures, and they get excited by the electrons on the metal because tungsten is paramagnetic. They also get magnetically locked because they have a very intense but highly localized internal magnetic field. And then they break up into their substructures, which are self-similar, and they go out into these fractal-like structures. When they're forming, they produce a magnetic fluid of electrons and ions, and this is our most famous sample here, which you maybe not see. I don't know if you can get the light on that. The pattern it's produced here, we call it the Vega Valley. That pattern is the pattern of a magnetic fluid. It's
so
like
people who are just listening, maybe we can describe. It's sort of looks like there's just like a trench of black, like burnt stuff going down the center of this piece of metal.
But it also has a lot of features on it, and it kind of looks like water that's running that's been etched into the metal.
Yeah, and what this is if you can go and look at ferrofluid. Ferrofluid is obviously a magnetic fluid. You can put that between two glass plates, and you end up with identical structures. It's laughably identical. Okay. and these are very specific scales. So they're just over about a millimeter, and that's the structures. This brass sheet had 2 brass sheets on top of it, and the fluidized electrons were formed in the core, and then they flowed out between the 2 brass sheets. The anode's up here, and it's 2 brass sheets stacked on top of each other with a few microns gaps in various places that help start the process. And so you've got ion acoustic waves in there, you've got piezoelectric, pyroelectric, and photoelectric, because you've got copper oxide photoelectric and piezoelectric and pyroelectric from the zinc oxide that come from the brass. So you have all of the electrics coming from your negatively biased cathode, all these electrons bunching up, and they form coherent structures that lead to these beautiful structures. And the beautiful structures are these wheels within wheels within wheels, minimally, structures of current loops. Coherent current
creep it
loops.
into the esoterica there for a second.
Yeah, and this is where it gets a bit weird. You see, I never expected to go there, but this is where it gets a bit weird. Because essentially, when you have a current loop, you get a magnetic vector through it. You can take 2 of those minimally, a yin and a yang, right? One rotating one way and one rotating the other way, and that produces a second order current loop. Okay? And that is supposed to produce an electric field, but it doesn't. It produces what's called a toroidal moment, which is a part of electrodynamics almost no one knows about outside of Russia, and almost no one knows about in there. But it was discovered in Dubovik by, oh God, it's an extension of Yakov Zeldovich's Arnapol from 1954. But it was Vladimir Dubovich in 1965, who published in his thesis in 1967 in Dubna the discovery of the toroidal moment, which is different. And you can go and look at this on Wikipedia. They do a fair good job of it. And you can look at, he's listed as several of the first references on Wikipedia. And once you get it was verified in 1997 in the West. And in more recent years, in mid to late 2000s and early 2010s, it started to be proposed for next generation magnetic memory storage and communication technologies. Okay, and the interesting thing is Hal Puthoff's 1993 patent, which he is working with the guy that you just interviewed with for a communication technology that can speak through plasma and into submarines, uses this basis. It doesn't call it the toroidal moment, but it is this basis. And it's something that produces scalar and vector potential waves, so they're not detectable by electromagnetic means. So the basic anapole moment is something that is not detectable by electromagnetic means. And these structures.
So how do you detect it? Is this a theoretical?
You use squids, you use Josephson junctions, you use anything that uses that kind of process. So you could all these things start to not literal squids. They're like quantum devices.
I was thinking we were going into the animal research here.
Although squids are very good at like being intelligent and weird like that, right? If you've ever played with a squid,
they're pretty alien creatures. Yeah. They're very strange.
I swear they're much more intelligent than us, and they just laugh at us when they look through the glass.
All right. Well, they don't belong in this discussion just yet. Okay. So,
no. It's a type of detection method, and so Larry Forsley is actually working with Hal Puthoff on this at the moment. Because when you've got like, and I'll give an example that everyone can accept, and we're not talking about woo-woo flying devices. We have a re-entry vehicle, and it's got a plasma sheath around it as it's re-entering. Well, we lose communications at that point, right? So we're going to use it for that. That's our justification for why we're going to be doing it, because so we can communicate with re-entry vehicles. All right, fine. All right, it's not for things that use this technology to fly. No, it can't be that. We're going to be using it for talking to vehicles, and so that's why you might use it. So nod nod wink wink, and so basically
there's a pretty big leap between something that can't necessarily be detected by regular electromagnetic sensing devices and something that produces flying machines.
Not really, actually, it's the same thing.
I mean, extraordinary claims, etc., etc. Do you want to flesh that out?
So in 2004, there was a paper published by Ken Shoulders, and he said that using fluidized electrons, which I've just shown you we can make, and you put them in a dielectric vessel, something like fused quartz. Why? Because if it produces charge on its outside, it charges the fused quartz and it keeps it confined. And then you spin it, it will produce 4 ounces of apparatus, tons of lift. Now, you might think that's weird. He also says in the next sentence that a slight modification of this can produce a very large amount of direct electricity.
And what's the setups? So like a fused glass quartz or a fused quartz tube?
Quartz is a means, but basically you need a dielectric material to get charged with electrons that are being excited by the coherent electrons in the fluidized state. And they will repel the sheath that is around the little ball lightning. And when I was...
where did the ball lightning come from, though?
The ball lightning is a magnetohydrodynamic structure that's made of these, firstly, ion electrons, and then ultimately what Larry Forsley mockingly called quark, gluon, plasma. And you see, the thing is, when you're making out of ions electrons, you need to create a particular field strength of between 10 to the 11 and 10 to the 15 Tesla to cause magnetic color disconfinement of baryons. Okay, once you do that, then you can cause the baryons to disassemble, and it produces an electron cloud, quark, gluon, plasma. And that can be under 1 micron. And if you go and look at Ken Shoulders' awarded 1992 patent, the first couple of diagrams are of a basic exotic vacuum object, and the basic size is 1 micron. The only thing that can produce a self-sustained structure is a quark, gluon, plasma. And in 2010-11, he said of S.V. Adamenko's work that his work is caused by a quark soup. And he said his work is the same as ball lightning. S.V. Adamenko's work is ball lightning. And then I decided, after I'd worked all of this out, I would go and read this $170 digital book that I bought of Adamenko's work. And sure enough, he says in there, it produces electron, quark, gluon, plasma.
Well, I mean, the interpretation of what is the underlying physics, I think, is less relevant than the phenomenon itself. Is that a reasonable?
I mean, are you basically can I just dumb this down? Like, are you basically just melting the air and pushing off of it? Is it or are you changing the density of the air for this buoyancy effect? Like, where is this lift coming from?
Yeah.
So, okay, have you seen the recent video from Canada of that beautiful ball lightning that splits up into 3 sub-ball lightnings before it finally dissipates?
No.
I've seen a lot of ball lightning videos, but I just it's like the easiest thing to pull off in Blender probably ever, so I just don't know what's real and what's not.
One
yeah, there's a lot of really great. There's good fake ones too. I'm like, man, that's amazing looking, and then it's like someone in the comments is like, haha, gotcha. So I just don't know what to make of these things at this point.
Yeah, well, the sincerity of the individuals, the type of the phenomena shown on the video, it really does look like the real thing. So we've made small ones. I've got a reactor over there that's called the Supernova, and we make them in a fused quartz chamber inside a double strength magnetron pulsed and with carbon particles in there to get it going. It's the long-lived nature. And I would refer you to this specific paper. I think it's 2019 by Bogdanovich et al. At the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute. And it's called Video Recordings of Long-Lived Plasmoids. Plasmoids being an abbreviation of the term plasma toroids. Okay? And the funny thing is that when Winston Bostick was doing his attempt at converting the hydrogen bomb into domestic fusion, He actually started that in 1948, and there'd been no official detonation of a hydrogen bomb at that time. But every nuclear bomb test that you look at, you get magnetohydrodynamics. You get these tori and this mushroom cloud structure going up into the sky. They would have known about the magnetohydrodynamics that's going on in a bomb from the get-go. And he has two deuterated titanium electrodes in a ceramic bullet, and that he puts 10,000 amp very fast discharge through it, produces a plasma loop of metal and deuterium ions that come across a magnetic field, and they produce two tori. They come off as a plasma loop, they pinch, magnetically reconnect, come together, and then they spin around each other in the center. And then that is a torus made of two tori. It's already producing a toroidal moment, which wasn't discovered until 1967 publicly and recognized in the West till 1997. So these are the things that you are building in a instantaneous discharge, but there are resonant ways to do it as well.
But hold on, I still can we talk about the lift character? I didn't get an answer.
So ball lightning is famous for. I work with a guy called Dr. George Eagley, and in 1983 he was brought over to Brookhaven National Laboratory as one of the first Soviet-era scientists to be brought into a U.S. national lab. Why? Because he had done 2 decades study of ball lightning. You go and look at his work, ball lightning studies. Dr. George Eagley. Basically, the electricity board or the insurance company would phone him up and say, "Come over. We've had someone claiming a ball lightning. Can you do a study on it?" Blah 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 blah. And I'll give you 2 examples. One example was this ball lightning came into the view of these people, and it kind of destabilized, and out of it came a load of sand. Another time, ball lightning came into view, and gallons of water came out of it. Now, what do those 2 things tell you?
Well, I mean,
you're dreaming. I don't know.
Things have gotten weird.
Hit
yeah.
yourself.
Well,
I have no idea.
Well, I mean, I think that you're driving at the idea that it's capable of picking something up and carrying it.
Very good. Yeah, that is. You know what? Almost no one bothered to answer that. That is fantastic, Anastasia, because almost no one even attempts to answer that. Yes, it's carrying it, and effectively you've got lift. At least you're negating the effect of whatever is causing the mass to have weight inside that volume of the ball lightning. And that is, in my view, exactly what it is doing. It's exactly doing that. It's preventing something that acts upon the mass that then gives it the property of weight, which causes it to fall to the larger gravitational body. Okay, when it destabilizes, the thing reattains its weight and then falls towards the gravitational body.
Okay, naive question. So if you have ball lightning that is dissipates and then a bunch of sand comes out of it, shouldn't you have been able to observe it picking up the sand and then traveling large distances in order to then deposit it conveniently in front of someone? Same for the water. Like or is it synthesizing it out of thin air? Like what's the...
Well, maybe it's doing that as well. So if you go to the 2010 or something, if you go to ball lightning on Wikipedia right now and look for the spectrum of ball lightning published in a major peer-reviewed journal, the only spectrum of ball lightning shows spectrum lines other than nitrogen and oxygen, which is in the air, of calcium, silicon, and iron. And what we produce on the broken up ball lightning structures on the outside of the floodplane of the fluidized electrons here is iron-oxygen core, which is a crenellated structure in the center. Outside of that, we see silicon dioxide and calcium oxide. And if you take those elements, that's most of the mass of the Earth.
Okay, yes. But connect those ideas for me, right? Like, I think that the thing that I struggle with when it comes to these presentations about fusion and ball lightning and everything else is that there's a lot of really intriguing threads, but the threads are very, very difficult to weave together into a linear narrative. Because what you're saying is very suggestive. You're like, there's ball lightning, this electron gas produces the elements of the Earth.
Let me do that for you. Okay. There is a presentation from 2018 on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project's YouTube site called on the properties of rotating bodies, something along those lines, by Zatalepin and Baranov from the Sochi conference from 2018. they show that if they get a dielectric and they spin it, and that can even be water, and they spin it one way on a balance, it will go up. If they spin it the other way, it will go down.
And this is just an electric repulsion type of thing? What's going on?
It's whatever it is. I'm just
so
talking
it's a
about
mystery.
Phenomena.
Right on.
Okay,
So
but hold on. So you're saying that if they take dielectric and they spin it on this balance, like how much of the dielectric? What kind of balance?
It's all in there. It's all in there without having the presentation in front of me. You can look at it. But they show that the spinning of natural ball lightning and synthetic laser produced ball lightning in that same presentation is so fast that it produces red and blue shift on either side by Dopplering the light. And so what Ken Shoulders is saying in 2004, you take this coherent condensate of fluidized electrons and you have 6 electrodes around which use phasing relationships on there to spin that material. And if you spin it in the right way, it'll produce a magnetohydrodynamic structure. And it moves the thing that gives the property of weight to mass. But it moves it either in one direction if you spin it one way, or it moves it in the other direction if you spin it the opposite direction. It's propulsion. And by the way, it works in space as well. Because you're not using the, you're moving the thing that gives mass to, weight to mass. Do you want to know what that is? According to Alexander Shishkin?
Yes.
So, right answer.
I was like, no, we're leaving.
No, all right. Goodbye. Dubovik, Karols, and Shishkin, you can go and see all these papers I've translated and stuff. You'll probably better do a better translation than me, Anastasia. But essentially, what they say is there is a torsional structure inside matter. Now, we've been talking about how to build this from resonance or discharge. There's these torsional structures in ordinary atoms, and they have a toroidal moment. The toroidal moment can interact with anything else with the toroidal moment, down to the special case of the toroidal moment, which is the anapole moment. Okay, the thing that has an anapole moment in the universe is a relic neutrino, what they call an elementary LC dipole. And these are what they call microleptons, and everything else is essentially built up from them in the Russian sphere. And essentially, they are about 1.97 Kelvin. In theory, they're all one superfluid condensate the whole universe wide. And what happens is, I had 2 questions when I was a 5-year-old and reading the Encyclopedia Britannica. That was the only things we had as books in the house, and my mum paid me £5 if I read a volume, right? So I had 2 questions. One, why are all the elements on Earth in particular locations? If they're raining down from some supernova, why do you get iron in the middle of the continents and aluminium on subduction zones and gold is in this place? Why isn't it same everywhere? Right? It just seemed bizarre to me. How do you get concentrations in particular places? And then the other thing is, why is there this perpetuum mobile of an electron spinning around an atom? Why? How does that happen? There's no perpetuum mobile, so how does it continue spinning around an atom for the end of time? Like, that's nonsense already, because I've been told it's nonsense by basic physics class. Well, what they say is, to keep an atom stable within our vacuum state, which is, depending on who you believe, 10 to the power 120 joules per cubic meter, or something like that, the atom takes in, through this toroidal moment structure, these relic neutrinos, which have a very low energy, but non-zero. They capture the energy they need, they breathe this material to keep the electrons at a particular orbit, and then they spit it out, and because it's so close to the condensate energy level, it returns to the condensate's energy level. Okay? If they are over-energized, the atoms, they will release that energy into the condensate through the shell of the atom. So that process of them going through actually has a moment on the atom. And that causes that to be pushed towards something that's able to cohere these things. Now, when you're cohering these things, you can synthesize matter. These things are about 0.25 of an electron volt when they're in clusters. And this was discovered by this guy, Alexander Parkhomov, who I translated this book, Space, Earth, Human. And he found over 30 years of research that he could lens this material and cause it to cause beta isotopes to change their decay rate. So this is a material that is naturally available in the environment that can be lensed, which means it's partially reflective. And he calculated its microns to millimeters, its de Broglie wavelength, by using diffraction grating. And it can then be focused onto, say, cobalt-60 and increase its decay rate. That's impossible, people say, right? Be that as it may, this is the some of the material that is able to be condensed into other ordinary matter. It has about 0.25 of an electron volt mass, calculated by him. And these things can be condensed into ordinary protons. So one's microns to millimeters, and the other one is the center of a nuclei, like a proton. Very, very, very small, like ridiculously small, okay? Takes a femtosecond for the light to travel across it, okay? So what happens is you're getting these magnetohydrodynamic structures in the Earth, in cavitation, in lightning bolts, inside the core of the Earth, doing low-energy nuclear reactions, or what I call coherent energy transformations, going on. And what's happening is it's pulling in these relic neutrinos, which is going through all of the intermediary matter in between, interacting with it very weakly, pushing it towards the body, which is condensing it. And rather than a steam turbine going from 1617 times volume to water condensed, it's going from 0.25 of an EV at microns to millimeter size to the size of a proton, which contains, let's say, 938 million electron volts. So you've got like 4,000 of these things occupying a much smaller space. So it is the gravitational well. And in this understanding, you go back to before Einstein, to the prevailing theory that Nikola Tesla and people before thought gravity was, which was a push model of gravity. And so the matter, this rarefied material in the cosmos, which is basically unlimited, is pushing down through all matter to a gravitational well, which is a condensator like the Earth. And if you read the work of Constantin Mail, he says that 900 million years ago, the Earth day was 19.2 hours. 200 million years ago, it was 21 hours. And today it's 24 hours and getting longer. Why? Because the Earth is expanding. The continents are moving apart because it's like drawing a picture on a balloon and it's stretching out, like was proposed in 1930s or something. And this is why dinosaurs were big with the same chemistry, because they literally weighed less. So these structures, ball lightning, are able to cohere the thing that is coming down the opposite direction that normally pushes normal matter to give it weight towards the Earth, because the Earth is sucking these things. It's like constantly sucking these things in. It's a constant well of condensation, and it's converted very, very slowly into ordinary matter.
Where are these things being shot off from, or where's the source of this?
Well, one theory
push?
is, if you don't subscribe to Eric Lerner's theory, that there's no Big Bang, then they are produced in Big Bang. If you subscribe to Eric Lerner's theory, they are produced by every kinetic energy, according to Parkhomov, by calculation and experiment, from any thermal process of condensed matter, which is actually, unfortunately, your guy that talked about the sun referred to condensed matter only being not plasma. But according to scientists, plasma, gas, liquid, and solid are all forms of condensed matter. Any of those type forms of matter in thermal kinetic energy over 1,000 degrees will start to produce relic neutrino, aka cold neutrino, and anti-neutrino pairs at this energy in de Broglie wavelength. And so these things are constantly produced by all matter. The thing is about sun, for instance, our sun, according to Alexander Parkhomov, the energy at which they're produced is insufficient to escape the flooding in of matter because the gravitational well of the sun is too high. So the sun is feeding on its neutrino sphere, causing and assisting with the nuclear reactions. But any that are produced on the sun can only escape when you've got a solar prominence or a flare or something. You only get them at those points. They're not coming from the sun, these type of neutrinos. They're not nuclear neutrinos. They're very different. They're like gamma rays are to infrared. They're completely different type of things. They're still like a photon is to a photon, but then they're not the same kind of properties and how they can interact with matter.
I want to see if I can get a mental model of this process, because right now there's a bunch of different actors that are kind of floating around in my brain. And so let's see if I can if I can get a linear story out of it. Because
What I said about what was said by Ken Shoulders, he is spinning that thing one round and it provides propulsion. Doesn't go into what propulsion is. I'll give you one more data point before the break. There was a group led by a Chinese scientist called Xu Wenju, operating from 1988 to 1999. They found during three-body alignments, that's solar or lunar eclipses, that 4 different things were observed to clearly change. 1, the crystallization of a lead-tin alloy. Under the shadow in the three-body alignment, it produced linear crystals, not random crystals. 2, a metal brass plate, which has spin nuclei in the copper, has some strain gauges, saw a sideways movement. So there's a push sideways during this three-body alignment. 3, the spectral lines of elements change. That is so important to what I've been telling you. Because what is it that is partially reflected by, say, the moon, and that causes a difference in the orbital space and orbital levels of electrons? What would cause them to be at different orbits to produce a different spectral line when they're excited by a photon? Okay, and then the last point was this. Cesium-137 and rubidium-87 atomic clocks changed their count rate. And when they went to look at the history, outside of those going back into history from the start of atomic clocks and looked where solar or lunar eclipses, they also changed. Which means because they're both beta isotopes, it had to have been a neutrino. Like it doesn't discuss what it is causing it, but 100% certainly it had to be a neutrino-like object that did it. I'm going to go and get some things.
Pardon the interruption, but I have a small favor to ask. If you are enjoying this conversation, if you have enjoyed other DemystifySci podcasts, then consider coming over to patreon.com/DemystifySci and supporting this project so we never have to get sponsorships, advertisements, or shill you weird stuff that you don't need. You can support us for just 75 cents a week, which even in these hard economic times covers a tremendous amount of ground for us. And so I hope to see you there at patreon.com/DemystifySci.
You want to see a toy?
Sure, let's see it.
So this is one of the 2 cells. This is the active cell. So you've got a heater in a...
raise that a little bit, yeah.
Sorry, yes.
There it is.
Heater in a alumina sheath, so a braided sheath, and then in between that you have the actual active wire supported by mica.
This actually looks like a death ray device from Star Wars or something.
You go like this. Yeah.
Incredible. It's a beautiful piece of, even if it was just a sculpture, I would love it on my desk.
Yeah, so we have another one in the other rooms, which was the control, and they were mounted in a long line, so we would have the control coming out here in a temperature-controlled room. Yeah, so you got the thermocouple strapped on there with the Captain tape, the yellow kind of tape that you see there. And then as other waypoints, I was referring to Constantin Mail in the Earth Growing. This is his book, Neutrino Power. You can go and look at the claims that they have for their technology to produce power day and night from the neutrino flux. They never refer to relic neutrinos. Here's a book everyone should have. Whittaker's original 1910 history of the theories of ether and electricity. Very good in there, talking about soliton models. This one is mind-bending. It was George Hathaway. There's a signed copy here of his work with John Hutchison. And it was George Hathaway that was brought in by Hal Puthoff. And Hal Puthoff brought in Ken Shoulders to try and find out what John Hutchison was doing. And
Hutchinson was the levitation guy?
The levitation, the making some metals go into other metals, making metals disappear. Aspects of the technologies is from Tesla. This is a very important book, Secrets of Cold War Technology. And I'm going to be researching with a guy that has called Griffin Brock, who's replicated the shadow graph tubes of Nikola Tesla when he was 15. He's now 21. He's a child prodigy. And we're going to be running experiments in California in a couple of weeks' time to look to see if we can use that to real-time remediate nuclear waste and do real-time coherent energy transformation reactions, is what I'm calling it from now, because I took a vote in the community. We said, what do we want to call this?
It's like there seems like there must be a lot of weaponized disinformation too if there's interested state actors in all of this. Like I wonder about that with the stuff like the levitation devices and the put off and all of this. Like there must be some actors out there that are interested in smoke screening what's actually happening too.
I think put off's in an extremely difficult position. I think between you and me and the fence post and all of your listeners, I think he's trying to help. I'll leave it like that.
What makes you say that?
I was in a round robin email for the last 5 or 6 emails where people talk about UFOs, and I don't really, but someone included me at some point, and he's in there, but I didn't know if it was a fake email. And he's never really responded. Then someone asked a question about Christianity. He says, I'm a devout Catholic, right? That's the only question on anything he's ever answered in 5 years. And then someone sent him one of my recent presentations, and he just answered with a thumbs up. So hopefully that doesn't get your family killed. Hal? Well, I'll take that as a win.
Finger indeed.
Jeez, I've never had my life threatened twice in 1 week. I believe our conversation with Forsley closed out with people who are friends with him meet
untimely ends.
Yeah.
And then several hours after we got off the phone with Forsley, the hillside caught on fire, and
yeah, we almost lost our house right after that interview. It's actually apparently some like methed out idiots.
Do it now before they release the episode.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, thank God for the local firefighters. They ended up putting it out, but it was.
Where are you based?
We're in Southern Oregon, and there was we're in this weird little valley, and apparently the story is that a hoarder meth head may have murdered his girlfriend and then set the house on fire, and then the hillside caught fire.
We should actually put in a little time lapse of it. Nasty made this beautiful time lapse of the whole. I mean, it was terrifying for a few hours. We were like, "Oh no, this is it." We were like starting to pack up our stuff, and because forest fires are no joke out here. I mean, they just eat miles and miles and miles of the woods every year, and it usually doesn't happen so close to town. But yeah, they called out the cavalry, and they were doing these like strafing runs with the red chemicals.
Do you have like a go bag and an exit plan?
I mean, we did. We grabbed, but the problem is like most of the stuff we own that's worth any money is all intricately woven into our studios. Like we have a big music studio, we have this video studio, and so it's like if we're really gonna evacuate, you got to like rip the whole house apart. Like it's gonna set us back, weeks probably. And so we're like just kind of watching. We're like, the worst thing possible would be we rip the whole house apart, and then they're like, yeah, it's fine. So
yeah, we collected the valuable papers and the cat, and then we're kind of waiting to see what would happen.
Well, that's it. Yeah, and you've got to take this I'm jumping off a plane view. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Whatever you save is no point if you're not saved yourself first. So you're always the first priority.
Yeah,
so things are just things, and most things can be replaced. They might seem like a tragedy that you might lose them, but no. And then the second things, there's just a few things that are really important. That trinket that your grandma gave you on her deathbed, and I don't know what it is. There's just certain things that you should have in your go bag if they don't need to be on the shelf, so you don't have to think about them. Yeah, fortunately, I don't have that problem here. But John Hutchison, had a few scary moments because he's up in the redwoods there in Northern California. So. He sent some pictures where you couldn't actually. It was the middle of the day, and it was basically like nighttime over the last few years.
Is he still alive?
Yeah, I speak to him daily. I've had about 5 emails from him just today, which is quite typical. I'm doing a small biography, but I've analysed some of his samples, and 100% he's seeing what. In fact, I derived this fractal toroidal structure from a sample of his, and from no maths and whatever.
So about I think that we can get to the fractal toroidal structure by way of making the disparate threads of the story that we were telling before the break kind of fit together. And so we were talking about the idea of, I guess, intraplanetary nucleosynthesis. Is that a fair label for it?
This process probably produced most of the elements in the crust of the Earth.
Okay, so it's...
I would argue that almost every element on Earth, the variation was produced here and continues to get produced here. Why? Because a 3-year-old can learn to start producing their own elements for about $40. And it takes 7 minutes to start the experiment.
Oh, let's hear about that.
Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. I want the theoretical framework.
Somebody asked actually in Discord for you to outline this $40 method. So let's get back to that.
But I guess it's easiest for me to start at the beginning. And so, do you? Of course. Do you have a? Do you
time and space?
No. So let us begin without a planet.
Yeah.
Are you imagining that this process happens in the absence of a planet, or do you have to have some kind of rocky body that's capable of kickstarting the creation of elements?
I think you can create solar systems from this.
Okay, and so what's there when you begin?
So if you believe the standard thinking, which I know many people don't, but you have to have some conversation based on what other people think sometimes.
Well, I mean, you right. Protoplanetary disks.
That 0.4% of the mass of the universe is the stuff you can see, like plasmas and suns and whatever. If you add in the black holes, you get up to 4%. Right? Now there's 22% so-called dark matter, and people go, "Oh, dark matter doesn't exist. It's blah 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 blah." Well, dark matter is stuff you can't detect electromagnetically. So, relic neutrinos and neutrinos would fall into this category, right? And there may be up to 2% of relic neutrinos in the cosmos in one coherent condensate. Now, just like any coherent condensate, you can have more of the same thing in certain places than others, which is weird. It's one wave function, but like a normal Bose-Einstein condensate, you can have more in the center than you have on the outside, but they're still all sharing the same wave function. It's a bit weird to think about. Same, but different. And so if there's up to 2% of that, and there's only 0.4% of everything we can see, excluding black holes, there's up to 5 times the amount of this material that you can use to make all of the things that we see. Right? So this also embedded into that. So the way I look at it is the relic neutrinos, these elementary LC dipoles, according to Shishkin's, Carroll, and Dubovik, they are the basic ether. They're a superfluid, condensate, universe-wide. So you put information into them using the toroidal moment because it's a superfluid and because it's one wave function. That information is already everywhere at the universe at the same time because it goes through all matter. So there is no time delay because you're speaking to all universe at the same time, right? Then there are clusters of these things, which they say is 0.89 times 10 to the 10 of these clusters, but there's various sizes of clusters. And these are the gel-like material that was considered in the 1800s as the model of the ether, over which light travels at a finite speed. Okay? And so that is not a superfluid. Now, this material can be captured from the environment, and so can the superfluid. And so Shishkin describes an experiment where he had a cavitator producing these, what he calls magnetotoroelectrical radiation. He now calls them energy solitons, but they are the same things as exotic vacuum objects or microball lightning. They're all the same thing. There are loads of people give them different names, right? And essentially he found that after a while, and not that long, it stopped producing these marks on X-rays. And he found he had to lift the device up and physically move it to a different part of his lab, put it down again and turn it on before he saw them again. So effectively, these things have an event horizon. The structures that can cohere these things have an event horizon over which they can tear this jelly, which is neutral and barely interacts with matter, out. And so you leave a hole which is not good for us as humans to go into, not good for biology to go into. And he argues that this is not healthy for you to be in this kind of environment. And if you're in an enclosed environment, the gel can't permeate through because it gets partially reflected by solid matter like windows and doors and buildings. So you need to get outside, you need to let the feng shui, let the air flow through. You need to, all these things have a reason when you start to understand the underlying structure. He says this gel-like material can then form into EVs, what they call elementary vortices, which are actual electrons. And 0.771 times 10 to the 11 electronic vortices can form into one energy soliton. And in recent experiments, and you can go and see all the translated work at remoteview.icu, they have shown that in the ordinary environment, there are low and mid-level energy solitons. When you do an exploding wire, a dielectric barrier discharge, a arc disruptive discharge, like Tesla was doing for many of his effects, like Ken Shoulders was doing, what Ken Shoulders in this kind of work here in 2005, and in John Hutchison's work, you're creating high energy solitons, but they are essentially structured the same with these 0.771 times 10 to the 11 electronic vortices. Now, if you shock these again with another shock, in fact, it's like a scalar pulse, you can break these energy solitons up into their constituent electronic vortices, which become electrons. And here's the freaking magic. The electronic vortice, the energy soliton, is in every atom. This is what I'm saying is part of the atom. It's the third component of the energy. Now, there's a 1992 declassified paper that I published in 2017 off the CIA website. They said, this was published in the Tribune Rybaya or something in Moscow. You probably know the name of the thing. I don't know. Anyway, I did a really good breakdown and building up of it. They said this thing that they think they've discovered in America, cold fusion, it's the same process, and we can use it to extract the hidden energy within matter. It provides the propulsion for the spacecraft, which we can get to Alpha Centauri in 6 years, using the energy hidden within 1 kilogram of iron. So it's both propulsion, that's accelerating and decelerating at 1.87 g or less than 2 g, up to 0.8 at the speed of light, and getting there in 6 years using the energy inside 1 kilogram of iron. Now, it's not just that it releases energy. Essentially, what happens is, what they found was for hydrogen isotopes, it's 2,000 to 4,000 times easier to release these energy solitons, which is in every atom, than it is for every atom from lithium and beyond. And here's the rub. It's 5 electron volts that you need. Now, why should that be interesting to you in recent days?
I don't know. Why?
Because Larry Forsley didn't understand how his co-deposition experiments worked with Stanislav Spak.
Explain that.
He says it's at 5 volts and we're getting fusion. They call it hot fusion because it produces some of the products, but they don't know. We don't know why it's that. But 5 electron volts is what you need. Now, if you do a pulse onto your electrode, it'll produce 5 electron volt shock waves through, which is the critical impact that they have determined in Dubna that releases only from hydrogen, and there's hydrogen in that co-deposition, right, as single protons, right, hydrogen atoms, to release that energy soliton. And it's the energy solitons which are the little micro machines that do the work. You can build them from resonance, you can build them from shock. The easiest thing to build them from shock from is hydrogen or anything that contains it, like water. And when you look at most low-energy nuclear reaction experiments, cold fusion reactions, water appears somewhere. Water or hydrogen, a source of hydrogen.
And so is this a modification of the atoms themselves? Like, what is the substance that we're talking about?
The substance is an energy soliton. Every atom has an energy soliton. To get the energy soliton out of an ordinary atom is 2,000 to 4,000 times easier when it's a proton, a deuteron, or a triton.
Okay, but what is the energy soliton?
The energy soliton is 0.771 times 10 to the 11 elementary vortices, or electrons in a coherent state as a superstructure of fractal toroidal electrodynamic structure. And they lose their charge and they lose their mass in this state. The mass is hidden within that structure.
Okay, so basically, you have a hydrogen that by convention has one proton, one electron, and then what you're saying is that there's also like 11 orders of magnitude
as well, already hidden inside that structure. Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's what they're saying.
I need to think about this.
That's what they're saying. That's what they observe. And it does this magic thing where you can literally burrow through, for instance, this is in 2005, but it's a reprint of 1990. And so I'm showing a paper from Infinite Energy, and it's by Ken Shoulders. And I'm showing it burrowing through various materials like aluminium oxide, alumina, which normally melts at just over 2000 degrees centigrade. And there it is. It's burrowing through, causing it to slosh about. These are little channels burrowed through. He actually found that if you put beeswax on the top of the alumina, which melts at something like beeswax melts at canuba wax melts at 57 degrees or something, it would come to the surface between the boundary, and it would lay the thin atom layer of or a couple of atoms thick of aluminium oxide underneath the beeswax. This is not thermal.
So, but you're not getting 11 orders of magnitude gain from these reactions, right? It's not like you're getting 11 orders of magnitude more energy out than you're putting in.
Well, it depends how many you can. Well, are you? Did you see what Larry Forsley said about what scared Pons and Fleischmann to death? He gave the thumbprint version. But this is in by Ruby Carrot.
Is that a comic book of?
It's a comic book, yeah. Look, here we go. This is the comic book issue of what happened with them coming into the lab. Oh no, we've lost our apparatus and it's punched a hole in the concrete floor. But what he didn't say is that the whole air was full of suspension of nanoparticles which did not settle. Which means they were so fine they could move around with just Brownian motion of gas particles. So this was amazing, to convert that concrete, that table, that glass, and make the water disappear. And it was 1 cc of palladium, and they realized it was way, way beyond fusion.
Okay, so this is something else that I wonder about this, which is why is this not being reproduced everywhere and currently in use to be generating energy?
Well, I was going to say at the beginning too, it just seems like everybody has relaxed on the idea of cold fusion. We talked about Japan, you mentioned Russia at the beginning, Italy, the Navy's got a fusion thing going on. We've got the LCF people at NASA. Like, it seems like people are relaxing on the idea.
Yes, and given that, and given the Fleischmann and Pons results, like, why is there not?
When are we going to have space cruise ships flying us to Alpha Centauri?
And why don't we have them yet? That's always my question for these conversations.
Well, David Adair demonstrated a little device that apparently disappeared into the sky when he was a 17-year-old. I think he's in his 60s or 70s now. That was at White Sands Missile Range or something like that. When I was last in Japan, I was given another 40 kilograms of Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto's research papers. And in there, I found these documents which showed that a technology was classified in 1995, which is almost exactly what worked out. And they say it produces a magnetohydrodynamic structure that self-contains into a sphere, a miniature sun, and it's a ball lightning fusion. That's what they said in 1995, right? And it was sent to President Bill Clinton. It was sent to the communications officer of Al Gore. It was sent to LLNL, to LANL, to NASA, to Dr. Edmund Storms, who you've been requested, who, by the way, I got him to admit that Ken Shoulders was correct about exotic vacuum objects as a way to do the work that he says all cold fusion is based on condensed charge clusters, essentially. That's what he said. After all of his research, he said that. And I said, how does that condense together? He says, well, Ken Shoulders explained it one way. Right. So I got him on the record, basically admitting at the end of the line that it probably is this. But right. I have these documents which showed 100% certainly that between 1995, when the patent was applied for, on the 8th of March, 1995, and somewhere in September, it was sent to the DOE and the Department of DOD for classification review, and the patent was not issued, and all media was subsequently not allowed on it.
Okay, so
Is what I've worked at.
So then the model of the world is that this is a technology that's workable and possible, and we could have fusion reactors that run everywhere producing abundant energy, but the Department of Defense has taken over the research and turned it into some kind of black program that we don't have access to anymore?
What I can tell you for certain is I have the post-dated envelopes of these documents. This is how brilliantly anal Dr. Takaaki Matsumoto was. I have the post-dated envelopes, and I can show the whole history of when this was classified and by who, or rather by Department of Energy or Department of Defense are who it was bumped up to. The thing is, it tends to destroy matter. So you've got researchers like Randall Mills at Brilliant Light Power, and he is thinking that the exact technology and exact processes that are required to produce these charge clusters, which he doesn't even mention, and he doesn't look for transmutations, he says they're not there, but he's literally listed about 30 different things in one of his most recent comments about why his technology has delays, and half of them are this thing broke, that thing broke, and blah, blah, blah. But when you look at them, they're all the kind of things that get broken by this stuff. So it's actually technologically quite difficult to do, because the temptation is to try and pump it too hard. And if you hit it with a pulse over 2000 volts, because I want to turn it up to 11, it breaks up the coherence in the structures. They produce these neutral structures which come out. And this is... I didn't know I was being tested when I went to a physics laboratory in January in North Moscow in 2015. They brought me in and they showed me this tube, and they said, "Oh, we've been running a Parkhomov experiment in here, and we're going to attach this hydrogen line to it. Okay, we're going to attach this hydrogen line." And then they got a lighter and they lit it, and all the way down this tube there were little jets of hydrogen coming out. And they said, "Do you know what this is? Can you explain this?" I said, "I don't know. It's the first time I've seen it." Because that was 2015. It was later in 2016 and early 2017 I came back across Ken Shoulder's work. I know 100% that what was being tried to be replicated by Google, and they wasted a $10 million because they didn't ask anyone that had done the research before, right, was producing structures that would burrow through alumina and leave holes and compromise the containment vessel. Now, if you make a reactor like this, you have to keep it running. You turn it off, the substructures come out. And I referred you to that long-lived plasmoids paper by Bogdanovich. Water flow onto a metal sheet, 200-volt bias, 2,000-volt pulses, produced ball lightnings, produced monopoles with strings between them, produced clusters of luminous objects that are moving around and rotating around their own axis. But for 2 days after the experiment, on the metal plate, they have toroidal structures glowing and moving around.
Like after the machine has been turned off?
Turned off, they got the metal, they moved it into another room, and they're under the microscope able to watch these things moving around. Leonid Urutskiev, he had a piece of titanium in water. He was trying to explain the weirdness, which I can go into at Chernobyl, which is not in the HBO documentary, which is an interesting fantasy, what they showed there. But great television. But he exploded this titanium foil in water, produces a ball lightning above, okay? And then he has a mirror so you can see the ball lightning above. A few milliseconds later, it produces micro ball lightning. The micro ball lightning are obviously more stable than the macro structure. This is what we find. The smaller structures are more stable. They're living longer. But what he found was on iron 57 plates, 0.7 of a meter away and another 1.7 of a meter away, with a north ferromagnetic magnet on the back and a south ferromagnetic magnet on the back and another piece of iron 57 in another room, they found that from the control piece of iron 57 that they had the fine magnetic moment shifting one way, and then they had a north magnetic pole on the other side and shifting the other way. And you know what? That lasted for 2 days. I could go on and on and on about these self-sustaining magnetic structures that bind to para and ferromagnetic materials. And Takaaki Matsumoto, he's doing his electrical discharges underwater. Only with iron does he see these toroidal clusters binding to the metal. In other cases, and with the iron as well, they go through the water, they go through the glass, they go through the air, they go into nuclear emulsions and leave these toroidal structures on the nuclear emulsions. They'd been neutral, they got excited at some point in the process, they become unneutral and interacted with the radiographic emulsion. But in some cases, they formed these ring structures. He immediately takes the electrode out, dries it, put it under the SEM, he sees a toroidal structure. Over 2 days, the toroidal structure collapses into new elements.
What kind of elements?
In his case, he found cobalt from whatever it was that he was starting with in the electrode.
So is it your suspicion that people have known about this kind of phenomenon for a very long time?
They've touched on the periphery of it for an extremely long time. And this structure here is the magnetohydrodynamic structure. When you align this is the Sothic triangle, this is the point of destruction, and this is the point of the center of the vortex and the anti-vortex. Around here, you'll produce an apple shape, which is the same, and this is 1914 Tesla's patent, right? It's not just an energy projector, it's an energy generator. These structures on here, they are domes. Why are they domes? Because it has minimum surface curvature. It has one dome in the center that's slightly higher surface curvature there, right, in the patent. Why? That's the overpressure discharge point. So it just comes off at that. Now, why is that important? What are energy solitons? Well, I can go into a room with 500 PhD students or 500 PhD, postdoctors, and I can say, what is static electricity? And you know what? No one's got a freaking clue. What is static electricity?
It's probably motion of the atoms.
Some sort of motion at the surface.
You're talking about how it's formed, like friction or turboelectric effect, or
no. I mean, full disclosure.
In the same way, like heat was originally thought of as a magical fluid, but it turned out to just be this sort of translational motion of the atoms with some chaos. Like, I think that we would have to assume that electricity is also some sort of patterned motion of the material.
Static electricity is energy solitons. It is charge clusters. It is exotic vacuum objects. They're naturally occurring. When Tesla went to the desert, what did he do? He chucked up a huge copper ball right the way into the sky to collect static electricity. These are single, neutral, but binding and conducting structures that can be converted into nearly 10 to the 11 electrons by giving them a disruptive discharge. This is what was found by Henry Murray. He had a collector up in the sky. He put it through the very first, before there was any transistors, he invented a transistor, and he used that, and then some multiplier grids. He was doing the same thing. His basically like a Schottky diode he'd made. It was able to capture the charge as it was released, and it didn't come back. So he could light a huge bank of light bulbs with almost no input power. So, well, they're all doing the same thing. It's been called ersions. It's been called... everyone had a name for it in the past, but basically it's static electricity. And you can release these things from inside hydrogen very, very easily.
Can we trace this? I'm sorry. I was just going to say, can we trace this idea back into the alchemical circles as well?
Yeah, you can. And I'm going to go to the top. Right bang to the top of the tree, Alchemist, Hajar al-Philosopher, right? If you overlay the magnetohydrodynamic structure, which is essentially, we are built in the image of the technology that runs the universe. Everything about us is in the form of and you can see Tesla with the famous image of him with a ball of lightning in both hands and in the exact structure you need to be. To show the magnetohydrodynamic structure with the Sothic triangle coming up into the core. He's put all kinds of Easter eggs into his photos to say, no, what, someone's going to work this out in the future and they're going to find it. I'm going to get a real kick out of it from the spirit world. Yeah, so basically, if you overlay the magnetohydrodynamic structure onto the Great Pyramid of Egypt, which you can do in this, we will go into it later, the $40 experiment that any child can do, right? On one side, it is creating lighter elements. On the other side, it's creating heavier elements. But if you start with the lightest element and you disassemble that using the Yang force, you go to prima materia. Okay, you go to this chi, what they call chi or prana, or you know, these kind of things in religion stuff. They could the breath of life and so on. So when you look at where the geometry lines up, the point of destruction, this point on the human anatomy, or when you open your mouth, it's there. Okay. It's this point on the Tesla's amplifier, this point where it joins the coil. That is exactly and precisely in the subterranean chamber, the so-called unfinished chamber. Okay. What it does is when you people don't understand when they're doing cavitation and HHO, why with the vibration they get more water gas being formed than they ordinarily would expect from the normal Faraday laws. Okay, the reason is this: you are producing a vortex. The vortex is changing, causing a not just a polarization, but a depletion in the vacuum energy in a gradient. This causes an inrush of chi from the environment, in this case, in the case of the pyramid, the earth, and it causes the water, in the same way it does in a water spout, to start disassociating. Not at standard temperature and pressure at 100 degrees. It starts to fall apart into water gas more readily than it ordinarily would. Okay, so a typical one is there's a 1969 NOAA photo off the coast of Florida. You've got a vortex up in the sky, which is one of these things, by the way, and it's producing a water spout. And they have two smoke flares on little barges down in the water, and you can see the prevailing winds in a completely different direction. And so all the waves, except in this spiral vortex coming into the center, and then there's this water vapor column going all the way up into the cloud. That isn't a depressurization going up into the cloud. That is freaking anti-gravity in the kind of weird sense in that it's a vector of the chi, the dark matter, running in the opposite direction. This goes into the water in the subterranean level, causes water to come up, and then I believe that there is a notchway in the Grand Gallery that's cut out. And it's about an inch and a half. And I believe that they used a particular type of granite, some of the most radioactive granite on Earth, from one of the quarries. They actually have this in one of the other pyramids, at least. And they had it in a slotway all the way down there. And it's exactly and correctly in the right place for the magnetohydrodynamics. The Earth rotates east. That is into the chi flow. Okay, it's rotating east. The pyramid is the ascending passage is oriented to the north, and its center line is 7 meters to the east. So in these structures, the magnetohydrodynamic structures are overlaid one on the other. So if this is the north side and the east side, this is going into the ether first. So it's going into the ether flux. When it comes up, you have alpha, beta, gamma coming out, and X-rays coming out of that thorium and uranium granite. That is way, way in excess of that necessary to split water into hydrogen and oxygen and able to convert the hydrogen using the over 5 electron volt established method to release the energy soliton. The energy soliton is in that state neutral. It then forms a cluster, forming an ether vortex, which then goes round a wormhole like we have created on this sample here. We've actually created that little lump there well, you can see it. That little lump is a wormhole, and the other side is where it spreads out and punches a hole. I'm just showing a sample, and you can see it on the other side here. You can see all these on my blog, and that is where it punches down the material that it's captured and goes through the wormhole. What it's doing is it's capturing this neutral material, and that assembles exactly and precisely where I took a photo on December the 26th, 2021 of a perfect alpha symbol on the backside of the so-called sarcophagus. That is exactly where the magnetohydrodynamics line up, where we see in our experiments, range of experiments, where the matter is reborn. And it's basically prima materia. And it captures, in my view, the spin nuclei, calcium-43, carbon-13, and oxygen-17 out of the calcium carbonate. Everything else is not spin, so it doesn't get captured. The only thing that's getting caught in here are the copper isotopes and the zinc-67. Okay?
Wait, this is a different piece that you're showing us.
No, it's the same piece. It's the same piece.
I see.
So it's brass, so it has copper and zinc. Copper 63, 65, both spin nuclei, and 67 is the only spin nuclei of zinc. So that is what gets moved around. In the pyramid, it's only... So you end up with a white powder that is literally loaded to the gills with chi, energy solitons, bound into it. And that is what you use for farsight remote viewing. It is what you use for propulsion. It is what you use for alchemy. It is, and you would give it a prototype to base. You get it base metal. You get it a prototype, which would be a monatomic, so it has the correct resonance for the atom. So you give it monatomic golds. You would give it monatomic silver, whatever element you want to create. You give it a bulk metal to chew. And you give it the Hajar al-Philosopher, the Philosopher's Stone, and you combine those at a specific resonant temperature to target predominantly one output element.
So are you producing vast quantities of rare metals yourself?
Of the metals you want.
Sure. Like
because it's a resonant phenomena. What is a matter wave? A matter wave is a centripetal de Broglie wave. That is something that folds in on itself, but doesn't interfere with itself. So the end of the cycle starts on the new cycle. So that's essentially what an electron is at a stable orbital. It is its wave function folding in on itself. And this is literally in that 1995 documents that have been classified. But it's also in Stanislav Adamenko's Controlled Nuclear Synthesis book from 2006.
But the question that I'm asking is more immediate. I'm like, are you yourself producing vast quantities of elements using this? Is this actually like a tenable
We have
technology?
produced some gold. We have produced some palladium. We produce. It seems to be fairly easy to produce silver, but they are little minute blobs. Yes, you can do it. Some Lena researchers have found that it's more economical in the product you get out of an experiment than the most economical mines in America, right? But they haven't gone on to do it because they got lucky with one experiment. They didn't have all the parameters nailed down, but it did do it. You know what I mean? So this is where expertise and systematic processing comes. What you tend to find, and I'm remastering the book of Takaaki Matsumoto in 1990. Submitted in March 1990, but submitted in 1990 or 1991, he showed that palladium and deuterium produced iron, calcium, silicon, all of the things that Larry Forsley said, I've got a patent for that, I'm putting in now. That's in fusion technology from 1991 by Takaaki Matsumoto, converting palladium into useless base metals. What does it do that? Because it's yin-yang. If you start with just a lot of heavy stuff and you give it some light stuff, it produces a lot of stuff in between. If you start with a lot of stuff, the only way it can go is heavier. If you start with a lot of heavy stuff, the only way it can go is lighter. So for instance, this is the great leveler. It's a machine that does not require the Coulomb barrier because it bases itself on coherent processes. The Coulomb barrier is out of the question when you have neutrinos involved. If you have a zone in the center of this structure that is basically what they call a phase singularity, so the toroidal fractal toroidal moment produces basically like the water going down a plug hole. Except it doesn't go out of the plug; it gets stuck at what's called a phase singularity, and it produces what's called a ring singularity. That's the same as a Kerr-Newman black hole. This will get you guy upset about black holes, but anyway, essentially it produces a magnetic field that goes up and up and up in strength. So I don't care what your magnetic strength is to produce color disconfinement of baryons. You're going to get there with resonance sooner or later, right? And it's actually quite quick. It's actually quite quick. And they call them vacuum currents in America. And you need to go and look at a 2009 paper by David Freiberger of SLAC, Stanford Linear Accelerator. If you want to go and look at some of the Soviet work, you can go and look at a 1993 paper published by Nevesky in the Russian journal Electricity. And he did the treatment on this that was then discussed by Zverblis in 1995, showing that they produce what's called an electromagnetic phantom. And you know what? When you produce an electromagnetic phantom, do you know how long it lasts for? 2 days. If you don't energize it, these structures persist for about 2 days before they break up of their own accord. If you keep giving them a little spin, they'll keep going. So once you make the structures, they will die, they will fail safe, they won't persist and eat up the planet, but they will damage your apparatus so you can't get it started again. So the option is to keep it going and not power it for not try and dial it up to 11. So yes, you can synthesize elements. You can desynthesize elements completely down to light and leptons. So because when you do color disconfinement of a baryon, you rip the quark out and the vacuum energy creates an anti-quark, right? Because you've got this vacuum energy gradient going into these structures. And that produces a meson. This is the thing that is there before baryons, if you believe the Big Bang theory. The meson, when it decays, because the disconfinement collapses, the confinement collapses, comes out as new elements, predominantly carbon, which is the most abundant interstellar atom, right? And I believe it's for this reason. It's fully explained now, right? And essentially, it produces all of the typical elements you'll find in your body. From
I thought
whatever
that hydrogen was the most abundant element.
Sorry?
I thought hydrogen was the most abundant.
Interstellar dust, particles, interstellar dust.
I see.
Yeah. So it's there's this Indian origin British a scientist that established this. He's quite an elderly gentleman in about his 80s. But anyway, it produces this, but also in the process, if it basically this coherent blob of material comes out, and it's like prima materia, and it comes back out of a very low vacuum pressure, and it comes into the ordinary vacuum pressure, and it instantaneously forms a range of elements. And this is what's going on in the Stanislav Adamenko work. It instantaneously forms new elements. What will also form is some of the quarks will decay, and you'll get electrons, photons, and actually nuclear neutrino energy, neutrinos. You lose that energy. But from the electrons and photons, you can do work. And from the conversion of matter, you can make radioactive elements safe. And so, like, you don't have to know all this, right, to do things that like Larry's doing. You don't even have to be right about it. It doesn't really matter. But I can show you where we've replicated what Matsumoto did in 1992, 1993, where he takes a very simple experiment. Before we get to the ultra experiment, he uses 1 millimeter lead wire into potassium hydroxide in a Petri dish with a copper plate behind, right? 3 80 millisecond pulses of 110 volts, 60 hertz AC. Okay, that is the experiment. The experiment is not even a second long, right? And then you see these lead spheres, 204, 6, 7, and 8 nucleons. And out of the pole, which is where the matter goes in, that's the weak spot. It gets ejected out of that when the confinement, electrodynamic confinement collapses. He gets a spray of carbon atoms. And carbon should never be fluidized. It only has a solid and a gaseous state. So why are we getting a fluid coming out which instantaneously freezes? We've replicated that. We did it with a Mars gas in Japan in 2019 without realizing it. So you can create stable elements from almost anything.
I mean, it's a wild story. And I think that the biggest... The most significant criticism that I've been able to find of it is that perhaps there's contaminants that are in the reaction vessels. And so when you're seeing all these outcomes, what you're really seeing is you're seeing the things that are already in the walls of your vessel coming out to the surface.
So here we go. Ultra pure lead. Potassium hydroxide in deionized water. There's no carbon there. None at all, right? Electricity. And out of a sphere, you're getting more than the internal volume of that hollow sphere coming out as an element which occupies more atomic volume than the lead. Because carbon is a lot less dense. So when it regains its electrons and becomes from a purely ionized state, a fully ionized state to ordinary atoms, after decohering, but basically you've got to think that the matter in this core is just wavelets of energy. And depending on how you electrodynamically confine it, how much matter you put in, you get different wavelets coming out. So what S.V. Adamenko shows in the latter starts of his stages of his book is that when you put the energy into these structures, it goes up and it starts to produce everything up to iron, and it keeps on at iron, and it's only when the baryon density exceeds a critical threshold, which he's done the maths for, I don't need to go into the maths, but it's there, right? You start to rapidly go up asymptotically, or rather like exponentially, up to thousands of AMU. Thousands of AMU. And in one of his experiments, he was doing a secondary iron mass spectrometry. And you fire the heavy primary ions in, and it knocks off the atoms on the accretion disk where these things were falling. And off come these other atoms, which go through a drift tube, and you can see the isotopes, the elements he produced. No atoms were coming off at all. And he turned off the photomultiplier, turned off the apparatus, and on the phosphor, they could see a glowing spot where they were firing the primary ions, which decayed exponentially. And they turned it on again, but they weren't even seeing the primary ions. Whatever this was, this black thing was consuming the primary ions and converting it partially into light. And then they found that around that central spot, there were smaller, regularly spaced spots that did the same thing. And in 2005, in a Ukrainian newspaper, he said, and he refers to his patent drawing where he has an iron-rich crenellated sphere in a pure copper accretion plate, and it's broken off, and it has a hollow, perfect spheroid inside. He says the nuclear reactions occur in that spherical hollow volume, probably with the use of dark matter.
I mean, so something that has uniformly come up over and over again is that the language for explaining what is happening here seems to be lagging behind the determination of the phenomenon. Where it's like when you start talking about baryons and muons and quark gluon plasmas and dark matter and all of these other things. I
never mentioned muons, but anyway.
Mesons, sorry.
Mesons, yeah.
So, like, it strikes me as... I spend a lot of time reading the original texts for, Faraday's experiments and Ampere's experiments and Coulomb and all of these people that are trying to determine what exactly is happening here. And when you read it, the language that they use is archaic and reveals a complete and total lack of a mental model for what is happening inside of the material. Like Ampere kind of gets to this point where he's like, well, there's probably vortices of some kind of electric fluid, but there's also these magnetic fluids, the astral and boreal fluids that are mixing together. And so you're reading it and you're like, this sounds insane. And it must have sounded insane at the time as well. And yet, what they're describing something that is unquestionably technologically applicable, right? Because Coulomb, Ampere, Faraday, they produce an output of work that leads inexorably into the Industrial Revolution, into the electrified, magnetized worlds that we inhabit today. So clearly they're onto something. Clearly there is something there. And I have this feeling that the process by which we were able to gradually refine our understanding of what's happening inside of electricity, not that we actually have a full and final model, comes down to the discovery of novel phenomena, right? So when Ørsted demonstrates that there is a relationship between magnetism and electricity, this is what sets Ampere on the path of actually defining electrodynamics and starting to work out the equations. And then eventually it leads to progressively finer and finer resolution for what might be happening. And to me, it seems like all of the conversations about fusion kind of center, or cold fusion, center around the same phenomenon right now, which is even harder to pin down, right? It's not as simple as taking a magnetized compass needle and showing that there's a circular magnetic field around a current-carrying wire. The experiments are much more difficult to characterize. They require more complex equipment.
So let me stop you there. Buy a 43 kilohertz nominal ultrasound cleaner. with an asymmetric bowl shape. That is to say, it's not a round one. And they're typically not. They're typically oval shaped, right? It won't be 43 kilohertz, and depending on the water you put in there, it will shift its resonance because of the load change, okay? And there are sweet spots. You then go and buy, if you can, and I know you can in the US because I've done it, a 10 CD cake box. And take the polycarbonate cap from that. And if you're lucky, you'll get one that is the correct size to fit in the top of this cheap ultrasonic denture and glasses and jewelry cleaner, right? Do not contaminate it with anything. Then get some kitchen foil, or go and buy your 5/9 aluminium from a scientific supplier, as you wish. Use your tap water, or go and buy your deionized water from a scientific supplier, as you wish. And then put it into the chamber. And what you do is you fold the aluminium over the edge. And what the cake box has is a rim around the outside. And so it has a piece of polycarbonate above. And then what it does is the sound waves comes up from the transducer. You have to have water above and below the aluminium foil. The sound waves comes up and it hits the polycarbonate and is reflected back. And what this does is like those sonic levitation experiments. And I saw Larry Forsley refer to acoustic fusion, where he didn't want to use the word sonofusion, I guess. But anyway, you can levitate, for instance, polystyrene balls on the nodes of a sound wave when it's phase conjugated. That is to say, it's a standing wave, like a string on a guitar, which you might be more familiar with yourself, having played the banjo. Is it? What do you play?
Whatever's around.
Yeah,
ukulele.
No, Shiloh plays everything. I play the bass.
Oh, okay. So you both know about resonant strings and so on. So you've got to imagine that the nodes on that is where these things are located. Now, either side of the node, like if you've got like one of those images where you put sand on a board and you put a frequency underneath and you get the standing waves, and sand moves to where it isn't being kicked around, right? Outside from that, you've got a gradient of motion, right? Which might be multi-axis, and that is really important, the multi-axis shear aspect to this. So what happens is, if you actually, I've shared this experiment where someone used something like ethylene glycol, and they, rather than putting the polystyrene beads, they put ethylene glycol on the standing wave, and it produces two spheres with a spiral galaxy coming in if you knock them up. And so it's not just a sphere being locked in there. There's other substructures that get formed transverse. And if you go and look at, I think it's a 1954 paper on the subject of ball lightning by Piotr Kapitsa, who won the Nobel Prize for his 1930s work in discovering the superfluidity in liquid helium. He says that basically microwaves produced in the sky go down, they reflect off the ground, and they come back up, producing standing waves, and the ball lightning forms transverse to the ground. At a standing wave node, effectively. And that's exactly what we're producing in this experiment. And what happens is the aluminium foil, because it's able to move and it's thin, it moves wherever it needs to the corresponding standing wave that's available in the range of different vibrations that are going through that water. Within typically 43 thousandths of 1 second, you start to see the formation of perfect yin-yang magnetohydrodynamic structures. And in there, we have filmed toroidal bubbles that are both moving around like that and moving around like that. And because of the shockwave basis, it removes the, and we've shown this actually occurring in terms of, we've done real-time gas spectrometry using a Sirius 2 gas spectrometer live. We did it live. We've shown that what happens is you remove the oxide layer from the aluminium oxide, it strips the oxygen out of the water, leaving atomic hydrogen exactly in the place where you've got maximum stretching and pushing, right? And so we are maximizing this process. So on one side, we looked at it at the university up the road here on SEM. You got inside the Visa Capices, inside the golden ratio lines. This is in the magnetohydrodynamic structure. You got this loop, and on the head of the loop, you have boron crystals where no calcium. Go around the other side through the wormhole in the water, and on the other side, which literally looks exactly like a spiral galaxy, you see calcium. And if you take oxygen from aluminium, you get boron. And if you add oxygen to aluminium, you get calcium. Oxygen, which is uniquely paramagnetic, is ripped, it would appear, to be from the aluminium, which is a single isotope, so it's easy to cohere it. And it comes round and it is fused. So you have fission and fusion. And it's basically using this toroidal moment. And when you are invoking the weak interaction, the Coulomb barrier is not a concern. When you are invoking something that spreads over microns to millimeters, it interacts with trillions of atoms simultaneously. And if you've got a process at that node that causes that aluminium to go to a perfect same temperature, what have you got? You've got a coherent matter at the center of that node in that standing wave, just like you've got that sand on that plate. Yeah?
Okay, so hold on. I have a what happens to the boron and the element?
Boron is synthesized.
Yes, the boron is synthesized. The calcium is synthesized. If you turn off the machine, can you then?
It forms a crystal right on that bit.
So you can literally like scrape it out.
You can literally see the boron crystals right in the center of the node. And if you push it, you end up producing iron. We produce silver. And the silver, like you can see some of these structures, because when they form the coherent structure can go around and get trapped on the node, and it gets more and more matter accruing into it. And so when you break the system, so there's this guy called Anatoly Fedorovich, I think, but his main name is Kladov. And he had 2 patents in 1983. He then patented at the panic at the end of the collapse of the Soviet war, the Cold War in the Soviet Union. He patented and got awarded in the European Union and in Russia a patent for heat production using cavitation. And in this patent, he shows that if we add aluminosilicates to the experiment, we don't get limited up to 4 times COP. That's coefficient of performance. That is more thermal energy out than electrical energy going into the driving motor. He got up to 11.7. Why? You do the maths, a fusion of silicon and silicon to iron, or aluminium and aluminium to iron, or you can basically do the maths, so you fuse those, and they are very abundant. Silicon, second most abundant element in the Earth's crust. Aluminium, third most abundant elements in the Earth's crust. If they are your fuel, forget your palladium. You can keep your palladium. No, thank you. I don't want your palladium. You see if you can make some money with that. We're going to work with iron, with silicon and aluminium. And so that is one of the things that we're replicating in the coming years. And I basically, because I know some people, these scientists in Russia, they found, in fact, it was Shishkin, thank you, Alexander, he found the patent Russian version. He sent that because some of it was handwritten in the European one. It was unlegible. I think the European office were just patenting anything that the Russians wanted to patent just to give them a break, right, at the end of the Cold War. And in 2000 to 2003, he published his work, Destruction of Matter. And in that, he showed that cesium-137 could be remediated extremely rapidly. But what he did show is that if you ran a cavitator for 2 hours, you ran it for 6 hours, you ran it for 100 hours, you ran it for 360 hours, the longer you left it, the more elements in the periodic table were produced. So the argument for people saying this is just contamination, what you're saying is, the longer you do the cavitation, the more contaminations are coming out of your materials until you get all of the periodic table, and then you start to get transuranics. Why are you getting transuranics in there? And this was also what happened to Leclerc. He had a simple pull pump.
So hold on. Are you saying that if you run it for long enough, you start to get radioactive elements?
I told you that. I told you that that's what was found by Adamenko. You get more than radioactive elements. He was finding things with AMUs of thousands of AMU. Like basically impossible elements.
Okay, so basically, if I run this experiment the way that you've described it, and I get a Geiger...
Not the one, because you use the fuel, and you've got abundant oxygen, hydrogen, and aluminium. Very, very hard in that situation, in this test, because basically the aluminium foil collapses and it all comes down to the bottom of the tank. It's a very safe...
It falls apart eventually, right?
Yeah, but what Leclerc did is he used, if you go into like one of your hardware stores, like I don't know, one of your hardware stores in America, you can get this decorative aluminium punched foil, which is like about 3 millimeters thick, and it has like a small circle and a big circle, and they're interspersed, right? And you can use it for making furniture or screens or whatever it is you want to do in your house, little hobby stuff, right? He rolled that up into like a Swiss roll in a piece of PVC pipe, had a pressure drop, and ran a pool pump through it. He created every element in the periodic table. And he nearly killed him and his colleague because he was getting radiation out. And he wasn't getting radiation out from the early part of the process. You push it too far and you get a resonant node. It does produce radioactive elements. When you switch off the system, then those decay normally. So when you ask, like, why don't people allow people to do this, is because you can do stuff like that. You can make things. It's small and it's like very, very low concentrations, but like you can end up creating radioactive particles. The other thing is that Kladoff in his patent shows that if he added particular elements, and rather than just letting the water flow through, get hot and leave, if he put it into a closed loop, this is before he did his cavitation collapse of matter work, put it into a closed loop, he would end up by producing radioactive neutrons, and depending on the elements he could put in, and I worked out why. So for instance, if he put a lithium compound in, because of the way that it adds a proton electron in the form of a neutron using the weak force into the lithium, you can end up going to lithium 9 or lithium 10, and it decays and it releases a neutron, and it can go back between 9 and 10 and 9 and 10 and keep doing this neutron, but when you switch it off it stops almost basically immediately. And he measured the neutrons at different distances to show that they were coming from the reactor, but that they were basically immediately stopped when the device was turned off. Right?
Do you have instructions? Oh, go ahead.
I'm very worried that we're going to run out of time on the two pieces that I really was hoping to get
Go on.
in this conversation. I'm getting really worried about it.
As
I promised it at the beginning. So.
As a closure to this section, do you have instructions for this aluminum foil sonicator device somewhere?
Is that the $40 device?
I aim it at about a 5-year-old level.
Okay, that's one of them.
Yes, and so where can people find this?
It's in 4K. I show what you need. I show how you do it. I show the experiment run, and even with a macro photography camera, so you can real time on the video see the formation of the yin yangs, and then you can basically look at other ultra videos. You can see the live microscope sessions where I show the findings.
And this is on the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project?
Yes, it is. But you can just search for ULTR. ULTR. And using that, you'll find a wide range of videos showing this. And literally, my daughter could do it at an extremely young age. I think all you need to do is the skills you're required to do is able to pour water, fold aluminium kitchen foil, and press one button. Most people are able to do that.
All right. Well, we will try it and we will report back.
All right. So can you with the time we have remaining, can you introduce us to the resurrection of the Prague alchemist circle? Yeah.
So essentially, Roger Green, who I met a few years ago in Sydney in Australia, he was the first investor into Andrea Rossi, and technically still owns any rights to up to nearly 50% of the world's population for release of any technology that comes out of Andrea Rossi. Andrea Rossi is currently claiming that he can produce basically unlimited energy, and so we'll see if that pans out. But anyway. He has been running health, like tuition on better eating and Chinese medicine for many years. But he's also interested in alchemy through my friend and colleague, Paul Harris, who is the inventor of the Therify, which is a system that uses charge clusters in healing approaches. Okay. So he actually is an alchemist. And he goes through the traditional methods of whatever it is. I'm not an expert in alchemy. That's his bag when we do the conference. And so we go to the Edward Kelly Tower or whatever it is in Prague, and we rent out the space there, and we actually do some tinctures. We're going to be focusing on mushrooms this year. We're going to take our people that come out into the forest and do some foraging. I've also got a huge bunch of mushrooms from previous years. I'm an absolute mushroom fanatic, so it's one of the reasons I like being here. And so we're going to be doing that, but then we're also going to Jan Rack's lab. Now, Jan Rack worked at Los Alamos. I think he did 40 years at CERN. He thinks he wasted his entire life. He actually worked with Eugene Podkletnov, who created the anti-gravity kind of impulse beam which is basically the same thing. But anyway, he got very excited when I started talking about quark, gluon plasma, because he thought he's wasted his entire life on mainstream physics. And finally, he said, "Oh, quark gluon plasma. That's like the most superfluid thing known to man." And that is why when it produces the magnetohydrodynamic structure, it stays there all the time. So we are going to do a couple of experiments where the delegates can actually participate in the experiments, and we will have an SEM there, so they can look at the material beforehand. They can conduct the experiment like the Ultra experiment, like we might do the Matsumoto lead exploding thing. And what we're going to do is another one with this unipolar arc discharge. It's got a tungsten rod. Now, what we found with tungsten and water interactions, it always produces calcium. Always produces calcium. And so we're going to take the tungsten welding rod, put it under the SEM, and see the elements that are in there. Typically, it's contaminated with oxygen and a bit of carbon on the surface. We'll take a pure copper foil, and we'll do a discharge. The people will be able to watch the discharge, do the discharge, do chain of custody, put it back in the SEM. I've not even done it yet, but I predict it will have calcium there. And so this will be the first time, I think, in history where the Joe public will be able to come in and see transmutation and participate in the experiments. And it's basically done. And I don't worry about it. And you know why I don't worry about it? Because Mahadevan Srinivasan, referred to as Chino Srinivasan in your talk with Larry Forsley, he, in ICCF 20 in Japan, in Sendai, revealed something that he'd been holding on to for act of shame and reputation trap for about 17 years. And that was a multi-megawatt, I think 11 megawatt ferrosilicon furnace in Coimbatore in India, which had been producing excess of 4 tons of metal a day. They were using scrap iron, silicon dioxide, and these huge, massive 3-phase graphite electrodes, and it was producing an excess of 3 tons of silicon and an excess of 1 ton of iron per day for 11 weeks. Now you do the maths on what the energy would be to do that you would yield from that, and it's just freaking absurd. What is it? You take carbon and oxygen coming from the silicon dioxide in the sand, and carbon coming from the electrodes, and that fuses to silicon. That's your extra 3 tons of silicon. And you take 2 silicons and you fuse, and then you get iron.
Wouldn't you be consuming
Roughly.
the electrodes in this process, though?
Yes, I am considering the electrodes. I'm saying
consuming them.
Yes, they do consume them.
But so if you're producing an excess of tons and tons of material, are they using?
They know how much sand they're putting in. They know how much scrap iron they're putting. They know precisely how much silicon is in that sand. They know precisely how much iron is in that iron ore, right? That scrap iron, rather, right?
And so what's the rate
at which
suddenly
they're getting an extra 3 tons of silicon and an extra 1 ton of iron for 11 weeks per day.
And so
Every day.
what's the rate at which they consume the carbon electrode?
They are freaking massive. They're like, this thing is industrial scale, furnace. And he sat on this, and this is what we produce in our supernova reactor. You put carbon in there, and you get silicon and iron out. And that's what I'm saying is produced in that. Go on. You want to ask a question?
I just want to know about the relationship between the ancient alchemists and this stuff. I feel like maybe you guys don't want to talk about that.
I'm totally done.
I really want to know why you're interested in this stuff, and if you see it as a symbolic map, and there people having understood these principles going back in antiquity, what the hell was going on in the original Prague alchemy circle?
Well, here's the thing: they were heating stuff up, right? So Alexander Parkhomov, who I showed you his book earlier, which I translated from Russian, he says you go over 1,000 degrees and you produce the cold or ultra low momentum neutrinos and antineutrinos. This allows the weak force on microns to millimeters to allow for beta capture, electron capture, or electron release from nuclei, so you could do transmutations. Okay. He produced a mathematical system which accounted for the type of things that you see produced in Lena. That is to say, production of elements that have no radioactive components to them typically, and they maintain the baryon number. Okay, so there's the same number of neutrons and protons. He did 1 to 2, that's fission, 2 to 1, and 2 to 2, that's nucleon exchange reactions. And he came up with about 1.3 million reactions. I said, can you give that data? I then got 2 people. I put a call out into the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project community, and 2 people came forward. One guy in Holland, and he developed a program called fuzzfizz.com, and another guy in New Zealand who was a nuclear scientist, and he developed this program with me called nanosoft.co.nz. And you can go on there and you can run these equations. Now, it is actually trillions of atoms that are interacting at the same time, but it was 1.3 million outputs valid just for the Mendeleev table for stable elements. Okay, so
tie this back to the Prague Alchemy
I'm getting to the punchline. I took that because the first thing I get asked by anyone, oh, you can do transmutation. Can you make gold? I thought, all right, I now got this calculator. I'm going to see if I use, if you go to the Royal Society of Chemistry, on their website, they talk about the history of chemistry, and they talk about alchemy before that. They've got a whole section on alchemy. They don't know why they use bismuth, right? But there's bismuth. And then they've got quicksilver, which is mercury. And then they've got lead. And they didn't use thallium, and thankfully they'd have all died quickly. Maybe they did, and that's maybe why some of them died. But they would typically use calcium or potassium, saltpeter or whatever. They would use potassium reduced from like burning wood and leaching out the material. So you get carbon, whatever in that. Okay. I took calcium and potassium and each of those elements, and I use this thing where I look at showing the energy out. Now, my theory is that you're squeezing it into a small box. I didn't know at the time when I was doing this, the electrodynamics that did that. But imagine that you're squeezing it into a small box. The product that would produce the most energy is doing the lowest distortion of the physical vacuum, which is why it produces the thing in a small box. So on the equations, you can say order in reverse order by the most energy first down to the bottom. And you know what came out? This took me 50 seconds, and it said that the most likely things to produce gold from any element in the periodic tables was lead, bismuth, or mercury with either calcium or potassium. They are the most likely. So I proved 5,000 years of history of alchemy in 50 seconds using it's literally the first thing I did, because I thought, I've got this equation calculated. This is what everyone's going to ask me. So I said, making gold. It's a presentation called Making Gold, and it's on an old Steemit channel. It's steemit.com/@mfmp, and you can go on there and you can see a few things that I published on there, and one of them is Making Gold with the early version. You can do the calculations yourself at nanosoft.co.nz. You can put in on the left hand side, you can put in CA, K, and then you can put H, HG, whatever, HG, and so on, whatever, and then you put gold on the other side, and it shows you that the most likely are those elements out. It produces all kinds of other elements, and this is when it comes down to resonance. So the alchemist would get the things that they want to make the thing with. They would raise the temperature to produce the cold neutrinos, which they didn't know about, but we know about now. These are the little micro machines. This is the Hajar al-Falasifa that I believe the Egyptians were producing as a white powder, like super duper stuff that you just throw it in, and I don't have to make it in the experiment. I've got literally these little micro machines that switch on and they start churning up the atoms and do magic with it, right? So basically you're making it in the same process, and then you would then refine the product you got, and there would be a proportion in there that would be the gold, and you would reduce it down, or depending on the temperature you would find a resonance, because there's going to be a resonance where and it's the baking time, like making a souffle. You can have all the ingredients, but you might not end up with a souffle. Or you can start with eggs and milk and butter and sugar, and you can make a whole range of different things. It depends which order, which concentrations you put them in there, how long you cook it for, what temperature and stuff. So that is the fine detail that you need to know to convert what is possible into making something probable. And that is how you do the alchemy.
I feel like there's layer upon layer of symbolism and meaning buried in these ancient texts as well. And I've heard you talk a little bit about that stuff, and I don't think in the 10 minutes remaining we're going to be able to
yes,
peel
we
that.
have. What about Fulcanelli's ring, the last great adept?
I don't
If
know
you look
about
at
this.
Fulcanelli's ring from the 19 whenever it is, you can go and look that up on my blog. It's literally the magnetohydrodynamic structure. And it shows the base metals going in. And on the top, it has 2 bars, and then it has a wave, a down wave, and an up wave and a down wave. It's showing a standing wave with 2 nodes. And if you draw the nodes down, they go into the center of the yin and the yang. It was literally mind-blowing when I saw that. And that is meant to be made pure gold made from lead.
Do you think that people were tapping into some sort of collective unconscious understanding of these processes? Like, where's this coming from? Is it forgotten science from ages past?
Well, the first thing is, it's literally written in your face. It's literally in your face. The answer to how the universe works, we are made in the image of the technology that runs the universe. That's it. Done. Right? The first symbol of the Christian church is the Vesica Pisces, which is the center of the magnetohydrodynamic vortex. The second symbol of the Christian church is the Chi Rho, which is the life force with torsional flow and density, according to the Greek symbols. It is literally exactly telling you what it is.
But there's a lot of intervening steps between recognizing that there's some kind of significant pattern and then using that in order to produce elementary transmutations.
I got lucky because I was a choir boy and I had exposure to all of these Christian symbols, right? And in my art history, I studied Greek pottery. So I was already predisposed to recognizing these symbols. I then was the first tutor of Lightwave 3D in the UK when I was 17. I've been using Lightwave, which was the first available 3D animation software on a computer outside of supercomputers and mainframes in the commercial space. And so, like, I was the first guy in the UK to use computer graphics in my art A level, right? So I did a lot of firsts, and I was primed to see this. And then what happened, there was a transition. Francesco Piantelli in 2015, on January the 6th, 2015, he said, "Don't tell nature what it is, let it show you." And I completely changed. I stopped looking for neutrons, stopped looking for alpha particles, stopped looking for gamma and X-rays. I stopped telling me what I should find for this to be valid research. I thought, I'm going to look to see what is actually on the samples when you do this stuff. And I'm going to look at the spatial arrangement, not the fact that it's a contamination, the fact that where are the contaminations if we're assuming they're contaminations. And then every single time, it's these particular arrangements. Exactly and precisely in this magnetohydrodynamic structure, where you get a heavier element in this part is torn apart, and it goes into one side, and then it produces heavier and lighter elements, and then it's fractal. And it's like, oh my God. And then I find out that the classified Soviet research is this. And then I find out that the US Navy's been interested in this forever. And so, oh my God. So like it's going down that. And so I came from being primed to recognize the symbols to seeing where the origin of the symbols, and because it's scale invariant, it works on every level. Like, for instance, I have a sample from John Hutchison, and it has a particular plasmoid structure on there, consuming the steel, which is exactly and identically, although it's flipped because it's on the other magnetic pole, 8 times the diameter of the sun as a sunspot on the European Space Agency imaging on the sun. So one is 8 times the diameter of the Earth, and the other one's a little thing about that big on a sample from John Hutchison from 1986. So the scale invariance is incredible. There is no limit to how you can structure these things, but you need to build it up from these small, stable structures. Then they will fractally arrange into these bigger structures, which are self-similar. And at every level, the vortex reduces at the golden ratio. The difference between this point and this point and this point is at the golden ratio. So everything that you see in nature comes out of this particular electrodynamics.
I will be honest, this feels like riding a bull a little bit. Like I don't know. It's a fire. This is actually really funny because before we sat down, we were like, okay, Bob basically knows everything, and it's going to be a fire hose of information, and so we have to figure out how to wrangle this. And
Sorry.
Yeah, I almost think like if you have time, we should get you back to talk more about this alchemical mirror throughout history, because I didn't do a good job of organizing my line of questions about that, and we kind of ran out of time. But I feel like there's something really interesting in the expression across the ages of these pattern recognitions, maybe with this sort of proto-conscious direction to it. You know, like, yeah, we want to make gold out of lead, but there's a lot of symbolic levels to that too, right? Because
every single symbol of heraldry and power is this structure sliced or given a plan or an elevation, or they're fractal versions of it. The minimum is 2, because you can't make the next fractal level up without having the yin and yang. But you can have 3, you can have 4. When you get 4, you get a swastika or a symbol of God-controlled power, like on the Shamshad Adad, 3,800-year-old stele from Samaria. Yeah, which these are the Maltese cross, they are the yin-yang, they are the fleur-de-lis, they are the paisley, they are every single symbol of heraldry and power are these things. Now, you have to ask yourself why. Did they just like this pretty pattern?
Maybe.
Shouldn't there just be abundant evidence of the transmutation of lead into gold?
Yes, it's called the Earth's crust.
Sure, but the alchemical harnessing of it. Like, I think that
well, they did. I mean, apparently that was one of the reasons the Knight Templar was shut down, if you could follow some of the stories, like whether that's true or not. So, like, if you could look at Tesla's photo, I love this photo. It's of him in his 1930s, I think it was, promoting the weapon to end all wars. It's the photo he took in the New York Times. And he has a tie. He's sitting cross-legged, showing a vortex on his feet. He then has this tie, which has phi symbol all over it, right? And then behind him, he has a flower pot, which is exactly cut off at the point where it stops interacting with matter on here, on the magnetohydrodynamic structure, okay? And it's chopped off, and it's the Vesica Pisces shaped pot, which is the Holy Grail, right? Cut off at that point. He has particles coming up, and then he has particles going round the central loop, actually hammered in. You can see it clearly in the photo. And then below that, he has the magnetohydrodynamic clover-shaped structure, which is overlaid one slightly above the other, because symmetry, none of us are symmetrical perfectly, because we are built in the image of the technology that runs the universe. If you take someone's face and you mirror it, they look freaking odd. And that's because we are built by the same technology. And you can see it under our experiments. They are asymmetric. And it's the same as if you go to the temples in Malta, the oldest things on Earth before they found Göbekli Tepe, and they're probably as old because they've never done carbon dating under the stones, right? These things are exactly that cloverleaf shape, exactly the magnetohydrodynamic shape. They are energy chi harvesting structures in the oldest religious structures we know on Earth.
This leaves me in many ways with more questions than I had when we began. One question that I have is, do you think that John Hutchinson would talk to us?
Well, I might see him in a couple of weeks, so maybe, yeah.
Okay.
I could reach out to him, and yeah, I mean, he describes himself as not a scientist, and he didn't specify what he did. But what he did, I have analyzed the samples. They definitely, if it wasn't for buying those samples from him, however many years it was, I said, I don't need big things. I just need small things, small and interesting ones. I've got a bunch of them in the drawer over there and so on. If it wasn't for that, I would not have seen this wheel, and then the next level up, which was made of other wheels, and then this next level up, which was made of 48 subsections. And then you find out that the anti-gravity craft of the ARV is 48. The flying disc of the sky gods on the same Shamshad Adad Assyrian stele has 48 substructures around it. That's the flying disc of the sky gods. I mean, that's literally what it's called, right? These are things I found out after I found the structure on the John Hutchinson sample. And I'm telling you, they're self-similar. They can fractally scale. They look exactly the same when you look at them. All you do is, the structures are at least 2 on every substructure, and they are rotated orthogonally. So they're XYZ, 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 XYZ. And every third level down, every wheel within a wheel within a wheel, it then self-repeats, but it's on a quantized level down. Yeah, I think he would. But he's a little hard to nail down sometimes. Let's put it like that.
I can imagine. Okay,
Yeah.
so aside from John Hutchinson, I think that we should get the Sonicator. I think that we should see what we can do. And then let's sit down for another
No. You should come to the Alchemy of Prague.
We should, which is next summer?
No, it's actually in September, late September.
It's this September. I don't know if we can do this September.
We just got back from Europe, yeah.
But
it's okay, it's not that far away.
This is
We're
true.
just on the same planet.
This is true. Well, so we'll put it in the pile of things to consider. But I think that we should.
I would love to sit down with a full tank of gas and look at some of these ancient texts and the symbols with you, if you can spare time for it at some point in the
Yeah, man.
year.
I would love to do that.
All right.
But if you don't come this year, you're going to miss the first time public can come in and watch things that you've been told all of your life is impossible happening right in front of your eyes. And I haven't even done one of the experiments that we're going to be doing, which, to be fair, Irving Langmuir kind of did it. And to be fair, it was done by David Hudson, who created the so-called Ormus. He had tungsten electrodes and they disappeared, and they produced something that came through the arc furnace and went and caused the silicon, the borosilicate glass to turn to powder on the glassware on the walls around the lab. The Sapphire project had their $11,000 probe coming into their double layers, and it instantaneously disappeared, and that was made of tungsten. And we've done it, and lots of other people. So I'm pretty sure it's going to work, and I'm pretty sure it's going to produce calcium, but I actually don't want to try it until the delegates are in the room. It's like, I predict this is going to happen, and we're going to all do it together.
Have you invited Lawrence Forsley to this?
I asked in Boulder, Colorado, I caught Lawrence Forsley coming out of a meeting, and I said, "When are you going to admit that this is charge clusters?" Anyway, he's now working with Hal Puthoff, who funded Ken Shoulders to work with John Hutchison. So he's got to have accepted it now. And now Edmund Storms is basically saying, yeah, it's charge clusters, which are exotic vacuum objects, which are energy solitons, which are magnetotoroelectrical radiation, which are, the whole field is narrowing down, and they're getting no choice now, because they will see the effects. I've shown exactly what to look for, and they will see it, right? I haven't even mentioned, I must mention Bin-Chuan Huang's work. We published together, along with his other co-authors, in Nature Scientific Reports last year. Mm-hmm. It's a massively read paper. It's changed the field. It's been cited by people that are working with the support of the Indian government. It's to put satellite LENR reactors into space and things like that. I predicted in 2022 that toroidal magnetohydrodynamic structures, fractal toroidal structures, would produce apple-shaped structures based on 2014 peer-reviewed mainstream journal work on what these fractal toroidal geometries would produce as stable magnetic vortices for memory storage, right? And it was in the context of ultra experiments, in terms of cavitation experiments. I then showed this again in Taiwan, in Taipei, in early December 2013. On the 29th of December, I got my first samples from Bin-Chuan Huang. In March, I looked at those samples on the inside of his reactor. Thousands and thousands of these perfect apple-shaped structures. Then they are breaking open, and two disk structures exactly at the scale of the subquanta of the magnetohydrodynamic wheel within wheel structures are coming out, bursting out. They're bursting out because the big one died and these are still living, right? And then one of the smaller ones breaks and two wheels come out of that, exactly at the magnetohydrodynamic structure. And in some cases, you've got a bursting, and all of the coherent matter is coming out, and you've got pure stellar synthesis of elements coming out in a vortex on a perfect copper oxide sheet, because it's a copper pipe. So you've got a background of pure copper oxide, you've got this apple-shaped structure, and out of it is burst out the side. The coherent matter's come out as a tornado of stellar synthesis elements. It's beautiful. It's basically a magnetic flux capacitor. It's literally a flux capacitor that does the fusion, and that is freaking hilarious.
Back to the Future.
All right, let's leave it here. Bob, you are a singular character, and I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to sit down with you.
I'm
and to go
very
through all this.
thankful to have an opportunity to reach out to your audience. I really, I love the work that you're doing. Every video I've seen, and I've not seen them all. I don't have all the time in the world, but and forgive me for my lengthy videos as well. So, but I really appreciated this opportunity to speak to your audience. I hope that they can engage with the material. Just a couple of waypoints. I am helping support a thing called evo-labs.io. They are a distributed autonomous organization that are being set up to support open researchers in this field. The prime directive is to take out of validity, that is to say expired patents that have not been shown in a functional form, but I've clearly worked out they should be functional, making them operable, and then releasing the details to make a minimum viable product. So we're going to do that with Kladov's work. We're looking to do that with the wind hex, which uses this process to turn glass and aluminium into extreme fine powder in seconds, using the same way that it disassembles matter. And this is being used in your dehydrated food products for like the last 20 years by Kraft Foods since they bought the license off Frank Polivka, right? So this literal magic process, which is just a force of nature, it's just nature, we are made in that way. This is what it is, and people can propose what they want to do as research, and then the community have a pool. There's they can vote on who gets the funding, and then we have a data acquisition system that's open for people to use. They can publish the experiments they're doing all live and so on. It's all locked into the blockchain, and it's not in any jurisdiction. So this is basically a way to open this science up where it cannot be shut down. Resilient and relentless is the aim with that. The Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project I've been volunteering for the last 13 years. It's an idea where we have thousands of people that have contributed, not just in small financial donations, but they have literally done the research of which I've been able to share some small fraction of that with you. They participate in experiments. They found correlations in previous scientific or formally classified work that's been dismissed, and so on. So thanks to the crowd, the donors big and small, and my own blog at remoteview.icu. You can get into the meat and potatoes since I launched that in 2009, and I launched that with Lockheed Martin's Systems and Methods for Generating Coherent Matter Waves. And if you go and look at that patent awarded to Lockheed Martin, you will see that they say that you can do all this magic by creating coherent matter waves, and that's what we make. And that's why we call it coherent energy transformation.
Amazing. All right, Bob. We'll let you go, man.
Let's keep in touch. Let's keep in touch. There's a lot left to explore, and we'll sit down
let's get together again.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I can talk. I do.
No, it's I think that these things just need digestion. Like I gotta go. I gotta read more. Gotta talk to other people. We'll come back. We'll figure out more.
Yeah.
There's a lot left to talk about.
I say to people typically, if you look at every video with O'Day, you look at magnetic clutch monopole clutch and a new dawn of an old age and O'Day, a new dimension. If you look at those and you work from the beginning to the end, you can get up to speed, and you'll basically know what I know because I've been sharing as I've going along, including live microscope analysis and live SEM analysis, whatever, live mass spectrometry and so on, in a way that's never been done before. So I have all of the evidence published, not like subsections of it, like. And people have been able to handle the samples, like these samples at conferences, and they can physically get in contact with them. It takes about 4 months on two times speed for people that have done it. So good luck with that.
We'll do our best. All right, thank you, and we'll see you again soon.
Have a great day or evening or whatever it is there.
You as well.
All right, take care, Bob.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Shiloh. Thanks, Anastasia.